James Darkblade had lived a hard life. At the age of 4, his world had been turned upside down from some unknown danger that had separated him from his parents, and it happened yet again to separate him from his teacher and guardian Kevlin Kodak. He was now 8 years old and alone on some backwater planet. James had been forced to do what he could to survive. Following into the wrong crowd with smugglers, card sharks, and other criminals, his abilities proved quite useful. From as far back as he could remember, James was able to use the Force like his Jedi ancestors. Even at his age, he showed great promise. At that time, he worked for a small-time gangster named Niden. Iran had black hair and a flowing beard tied with a strap of leather at the bottom. He was middle-aged and had only one eye as the other one was scarred shut. James was with him that fateful day, when Iran was paying a bribe to a local imperial official. Iran's bodyguards surrounded him. This time around, James's presence was simply a formality, as Iran did not suspect any treachery. The customs agent and him had a long-existing working relationship. Neither saw any point in making any changes. Standing in the background, it was James who sensed that something was wrong. Reaching out with his feelings, he tried to locate the source. After a few moments, the thoughts of an Imperial stormtrooper came to him. The vision of a dark cloaked figure appeared in the man's mind, and James felt a cold chill run up his spine. "Iran!" James cried out in warning. Just as the man started to turn, a blaster bolt struck Iran in his side, causing him to cry out as he spun crashing to the ground. A hail of blaster fire sizzled through the air, killing many of the bodyguards. "This way!" James yelled, motioning for the survivors to follow. Some did, while the rest fell to more fire. Leading the way down a series of alleyways, James entered a building, sensing that they had lost most of their pursuers. Rushing through a few passageways, he entered a barely lit room. Inside the room, he felt cold and darkness surround him. It was frightening at first, but exhilarating at the same time. In it, he sensed a power he had never felt, and it was intoxicating. Behind him, James could feel the fear of the 3 bodyguards. Though terrified, they fired at the figure in the black armor and cloak that entered the room from the far side. Darth Vader idly reflected the bolts back, killing the guards easily. Angry at losing those he had called friends, James ignited his lightsaber, its orange light illuminating his face. Then with a battle cry, he charged the Dark Lord. Embracing his fear and his anger, it fueled him as he clashed with Vader. While young and agile, Vader's skill and experience far outweighed him, allowing him to win in the end. Using the Force, Vader ripped the blade from James's hand, sending it skittering across the floor. A push through the Force sent James down to his knees and held him there. He waited for the death blow to fall, but it never came. Vader looked down at James and hesitated, his blade posed to kill. In this young man, he felt great potential, and something else. The dark side was calling to this young man. Vader had never felt such a thing. Even as he tried to kill him, Vader felt the Force bulk in response, leaving the Sith Lord. Somehow the dark side was protecting this boy and refused to let him be harmed. Shutting down his lightsaber, Vader said, "What is your name, boy?" Looking up at Vader, James heard his strange breathing and saw the lit controls at the front of his armor. Kneeling on the hard floor, James said, "James Darkblade." It was a name that Vader recognized. The Jedi family was well known in the Jedi's history. Brave Jedi, they had been known for being the rear guard when it was required, and for sensing things few others could sense. They had disappeared before the Great Scourge and before the Sith War. Always they would disappear before war came, as if sensing it. Looking the boy over, Vader saw something that interested him. Reaching out, his gloved hand lifted James's right sleeve, revealing a birthmark that was in the shape of the Mark of the Sith. Vader remembered it from his studies looking into the ancient Sith Lords. Now it made sense somehow that the powers of the Sith and this child were linked. "Join me and become my apprentice. Together we will complete your training," Darth Vader said. Dark whispers began to fill James' mind, offering untold power. The dark side offered him its secrets, desiring him and seducing him with its voice. Its hands reached out to him, touching his body and soul, giving of itself. In that moment, he accepted its cold embrace and was reborn. Rising to one knee, James placed both hands on his raised knee, saying, I pledge my loyalty to you, my master." Vader was pleased with his new apprentice. Standing there, he imagined what the Emperor had felt when he had turned Vader to the dark side. He was a powerful young Force user that he could mold and could be his right hand, destroying his enemies. Now that James had been turned, he would need a new name, as was the tradition among the Sith. As if reaching from the ether for the boy's new name, taking a deep breath, he considered it, sensing it was well chosen. "Rise, Darth Malice," Vader said. Looking up at his master as he rose to his feet, an icy smirk crept onto Malice's face. Vader took a personal hand in James's training. Under his master's guidance, his powers grew in leaps and bounds while they were in private. As they approached Coruscant, Vader spoke to James, saying, "You will join in study with the other Dark Jedi. You will be introduced as a new Inuit. The Emperor requires me to continue to hunt down the Jedi. In time, I will return for you. When you are ready, I will have much work for you to do." Following his master down the hall they were travelling, he could sense that they had exited hyperspace. Already the presence of many lives could easily be felt by him. Pulling up the hood of his black cloak given to him by his master, he covered his face before bowing to Lord Vader and before turning to leave. Heading through a sliding door, he headed into the docking bay where a Lambda-class transport ship was waiting for him. Stepping off the transport, he watched as it took off from the launch pad. Entering the Dark Jedi Academy, he was assigned a room and met some of his fellow students. James was not impressed with any of them, including the teachers. While he had more raw power than them, they did know abilities he did not. Blending in, he melded into the background, trying to act unimpressive while learning all he could. His favourite pastime was setting the other teachers and students against each other. Playing them like puppets, he planted a suggestion into their minds or encouraged feelings of greed, anger, and fear. When a rival grew too powerful, using the right touch here or there and was able to eliminate them. Unfortunately, 3 students caught on to this. James had taken a small transport ship out into orbit to practice and experiment with new powers. Stepping to the airlock without wearing a spacesuit, James created a physical shield to protect him from the pressures of space. Stepping out, he held his breath, concentrating in the Force. Not allowing himself to panic or fear to overwhelm him, he focused, meditating with cold detachment. The Force flowing through him, he pushed his body to the ends of its endurance, holding his body's air inside far longer than any other sentient creature ever could. As his body weakened, James at last moment entered the airlock again, pushing the button to enter the ship. Inside, he felt his attackers before he saw them. Taking advantage of his weakness, they forced him on the defensive. Putting up the physical shield, he protected himself from their lightsabers as they forced him back. As one swung, James charged forward, ramming the man with his body and shield. The Dark Jedi fell. The wind knocked out of him before he was knocked unconscious when he caught a kick to the face. As James rolled on the ground as the 2 others attacked, striking at him in his vulnerable position, James was too weak in his present state to easily fend them off. A blade managed to make a hole in his shield as he grew tired, grazing his arm. James managed to shield himself again in time to fend off another blow. Exhausted, he was helpless against them. The dark whispers came yet again, offering the power he needed. The dark side offered its power freely to him, wishing him to live. Grasping it with his mind, James used the Force to call wind from nowhere. The swirling air currents picked up the 2 young men, lifting them off the ground and tossing them to either side of the room. Gaining his feet, James rushed the man to his left, stabbing him with his fingers. The man stiffened as the James's touch stabbed him like a knife, piercing his heart. Leaving the man to die behind him, James turned on the final attacker. Making a gesture, he lifted the Dark Jedi off the ground, holding him in mid-air. "You dare attack me, worm? You and your pitiful friends could not have hoped to match me in my prime. I am Sith, not a mere Dark Jedi as you are. Now you will pay for your insolence," James said with fury. Making a crushing gesture with his right hand, he crushed the man's bones, contorted the boy's body until his face was frozen in agony. Releasing him, James called the boy's lightsaber to him. Looking on his face, James recognized the face of Derrens, a boy he had expelled from the academy due to a few manipulations. The boy had been here for revenge. James looked at him in disgust. It was a foolish action and weak-willed. Had the boy been truly thinking, he would have simply locked James outside the airlock instead of letting him inside to face him. By the time James had gotten it open, he would either have been dead or too weak to defend himself at all. It was Derrens' last mistake, as his own lightsaber decapitated him. The last of his enemies awoke, getting up to see his two comrades dead. Fear gripped his heart as he realised James had done it. "Ah, you're awake. Good, I could use some entertainment," James said. Terrified, the young man tried to run his hood, flying off in his rush. James idly noticed his short brown hair was well groomed as he tossed his lightsaber. Taking of the man's hand, holding its lightsaber at the wrist. Moaning in pain, the boy called Nera stared at the stump. A backhand fist caught him full in the face, breaking his nose and sending him flying backwards. Lying on the ground, he shook of the cobwebs, using the force to nullify his pain. Desperately, he searched for his weapon when another skittered towards him. James watched him look up in surprise until he realised what James was doing and shook his head in terror. "I'm going to kill you either way, so you might as well defend yourself," James said offhandedly, his lightsaber already back in his hand. Picking up the saber, Nera activated it. The smaller man was quick and agile. He hoped that these advantages might allow him to survive this. James dodged to the side as Nera rushed past, only to be nicked on the leg by James's blade. Limping, Nera turned to face his foe. Looking into his eyes, Nera knew that James was toying with him. That blow could have easily have changed to kill him. He cursed his friends for not seeing it before. They should not have come, because they had greatly underestimated their former classmate. Nera could feel the power that James possessed creeping up his spine as James played on his fears, feeding off of them. Images and emotions distracted him, taking away from any conscious effort. Knowing it was hopeless, Nera had no desire to be taken piece by piece. Tossing the saber away, he fell to his knees. "Get it over with," Nera said. Nodding, James came forward, cutting him down with a downward stroke of his blade. Tossing the bodies into the airlock, James ejected them out into space. James had been patient long enough. Too long had he waited for the time of his master's return. Tired of waiting, he set a course for a world on the outer rim, pausing in the middle of it. "Greetings, young Darkblade. I have been waiting for you." A dark voice crept into his mind. "Who are you?" James' mind answered back. "I am Naga Sado, a Dark Lord of the Sith, and the reason for the mark on your arm. Come to me and I will tell you more," Naga said. Setting the coordinates, James initiated hyperspace jump and began the journey. A dream came to James as he travelled through hyperspace. He had returned to the Dark Jedi Academy after killing Nera and had walked its halls. The Dark Jedi came at him, sensing his purpose there. Like a great storm, he had laid waste to them. Bodies covered the halls as he made his way in. All of them were his fellow students, believing that somehow their numbers would count. In the end, it had meant nothing. Walking to the inner chamber, he found an audience hall where the instructors waited. Here they would make their stand. He smiled at the thought of it, eyeing them contemptuously. They had not an inkling of his power. Letting the dark side flow through him, he lifted pictures off the walls and sculptures off their pedestals. They flew swiftly at the masters, all too many for any to block. Many of them fell in those first few moments. Others themselves were lifted off the ground as the barrage stopped smashing them into the walls. Wet thuds could be heard as their bodies were broken at the force of it. He let them fall to the ground, some dying and others already dead. Some remained unharmed, standing there staring at their comrades in terror. Then they looked to him all at once, and he revelled in their fear. It made all the more powerful as he fed off it. Activating his lightsaber, he came upon them as a nightmare out of their worst dreams. Even as he left the academy behind, now all so quiet he could still their screams. Some had begged for mercy, but their cries fell on deaf ears. Mercy was for the weak, and he was strong. Their cries at the end only proved it. They had served their purpose, and now they would serve as a warning to all who challenged him. Standing there, his dark form seeming to absorb the moonlight, James thought, "One day I will come for you, Emperor, my master and I together." At long last, my master will receive his revenge for what you did to him, and we will rule all of the galaxy together as master and apprentice. Until then, sit on your throne and wait for the inevitable. I am coming. Exiting hyperspace, he found himself in orbit in front of a dark world. Below, he could feel the cold touch of Sith magic, far more pure than the presence of a dark Jedi. Looking through the cockpit, James saw shadowy ruins below. Though James had never been here before, he felt at home here. It was not the first time this had happened. When training with Sith artifacts, he had instinctively known how to use them. Though he had kept it to himself, James had been shown secrets that the artifacts would show no one else. He knew it had something to do with the mark on his right shoulder, but beyond that he didn't know. His mind swam with dreams too elusive to grasp, showing him visions of the distant past. One such image was the building in front of him as he sat down. A great pyramid, it was the focus point of Sith power in the ancient city, and it was here that he felt the presence that had called him. A shade appeared at the entrance, its ghostly figure barring the way. "Move, spirit. I have come for your master," James said, calm and disinterested. "And if I do not, what is to stop me from draining the life from your body, Dark Jedi?" The shade asked, its voice filled with arrogance and contempt. Dropping the mask that he had set around himself to hide his true self from Dark Jedi, James revealed his power to the human spirit. The shade trembled in fear as it saw who he really was for the first time. Reaching out through the Force, he gripped the spirit, hearing it cry out. Pain filling its voice, the Guardian said, "Forgive me, I didn't know." Passing through the Guardian as it stood doubled over in suffering pain, he released it once he was safely inside. "Continue to do your duty, but do not cross me again," James said without looking back. He could sense the spirit withdrawing, its relief evident. Long had it waited for his coming, and it saw that its master had not misjudged the new arrival. He was indeed powerful. An aura of coldness and fear surrounded James now that he was glad to shed his disguise. Small creatures fled from him, scurrying about as they came in contact with that aura, as was its design. The Sith used it to fill their allies and enemies with a certain terror, intimidating them so they could be easier to manage. Another spirit appeared. This one wore ancient armour, and unlike the Guardian, was not human. Behind the spirit sat a figure on a throne whose ancient bones bore the same armour down to the last detail. Following James's gaze, Naga Sado smiled. "Through the Force, many things are possible, even life beyond death. I died thousands of years ago when the Republic and the Sith Empire both existed. Though our empire fell, the Sith still exist in one form or another, but you are the last of our bloodline, the last true Sith. Once that name meant only a race, but now it is the powers and abilities that we passed on through what we left behind," Naga said. "So that is why you called me here? To pass on the traditions of our people?" James asked. "That and more. The mark you bear shows that you are one of us, and the dark side recognizes that. We lived long lives holding great power, far longer than any after us could. That and much more is in your blood, James. Learn from me and I will teach you all you need to know. I do not want the last of our secrets to die here when they can be passed on to my descendant," Naga replied. "But how is this possible? Surely the Jedi would have recognized a Sith still existed," James said, looking for the final piece of the puzzle. Then it hit him. "You hid one of your own among them," James said in sudden realization. Chuckling, Naga said, "Yes, we did. I created a child through my knowledge of Sith magic and science. She was Sith on the inside, but human on the outside. She married and had a child with James Darkblade, the patriarch of your family, but that is the past. As of now, I will teach you secrets that you never knew existed. Here you will learn many things. I have much to teach you." The spirit had James read many texts from the library that Naga showed him. It showed him the history of the Sith race and the origins of their magic. James learned much of past that had remained hidden to him and shrouded in mystery. The Sith are unlike any other. Through us, the true rawness of the Force comes into being. While we can command it, we are also its tools. As you become more powerful, you and the dark side will become one," Naga said. Will you be changed by it? James asked. Laughing, Naga said, What makes you think you haven't begun to already? Our power comes from our passions, and if you wish those of others. Others? James asked. Yes, child. We can feed off of the negative emotions of others, even encourage them for such a purpose, Naga said, leading him to an empty room devoid of any decorations except ancient Sith writings that seemed to glow with a dark red light. Sit. Here you will find it easier to focus on faraway places, as well as the past and the future, Naga said. Sitting on the cold floor, James closed his yes, letting the force flowing through him. Upon its currents, he saw 3 rivers. The first led into images of his childhood and beyond, the second led into future events, and the third showed the present. James was surprised by the ease of it. While the room helps you, your own unique abilities allow this. Most Force users see them in a jumble altogether, and must search for Time's secrets. You, on the other hand, can separate them when you choose, but you can only focus on one, and the farther you go, the more difficult it will become. Naga's voice could be heard in his mind. Strange, I feel something odd yet familiar in the present. It's an image of the younger me. James voiced back. Focusing his attention on the image, he gripped it in his mind and drew it to him. Holding it in place, he looked at the image, studying it. As he took in more and more details, a rage built in him. Looking into the past, he searched for the cause of this anomaly. He saw a vision of other dark Jedi, somehow aware of his presence. They had been watching his progress since he had arrived at the Dark Jedi Academy. Looking back further, he saw the image of the Emperor. James had seen statues of him in Coruscant and knew what he looked like. The Emperor had desired that James be cloned so that the replicant could be his willing servant. Long had James wished to aid his master in killing the old man, so his master's ascension to the throne could occur. Both had no illusions to the Emperor's power. Together it was possible for them to overcome him. While he was still angry, a part of James recognized that the actions the Emperor had taken had been meant to neutralize him. Leaving the dark world behind, James headed to the Solven system. One of the doctors in charge of the clone studied the specimen's readouts. All appeared to be in order. The age acceleration had been successful, and there were no flaws in the clone's physiology. Dr. Itten Temmen smiled at the thought of this perfect specimen. He was no fool, unlike his fellows. Though it had been a dark Jedi who had hired them, it was obvious that the Emperor must have a part in this. The fact the men and women here were among Palpatine's best cloners spoke to that. The security was of course mercenary on the surface, but Itten had cloned some of the guards that had watched over him and had seen Imperial training before. An outsider would never have guessed what happened inside the Durasteel-encased building, but the doctor did. His work finished, Itton headed toward the break room down the hall when he heard blaster fire. Startled, Itten immediately scrambled towards the room he was heading towards, diving underneath a table for shelter. Guards rushed by the doorway as it shut in his wake, and screams of dying men could be heard. An explosion blew the door to the room off its hinges, sending it flying into the room, its smoking mass sliding across the smooth tiled floor until it was only inches from him. A guard, his brown uniform torn and burned, tried to run past the door towards the lab, hoping to escape, but was halted. A lightsaber sank into his back. Stiffening, the man reached wordlessly for the weapon still embedded in his back, before some mysterious force ripped it from its purchase. Overwhelmed from pain and weakness, the guard fell to his knees, helpless, his blaster slipping from his now limp fingers. His ears were bleeding from the concussion of the blast. He never saw the dark-robed figure as he approached from behind his black hood, covering all his features from Itten as he watched. Glancing idly at the fallen man, he took his head off with a single swipe of his saber, parting it from the rest of his body easily. Itten held his breath, hoping the frightening being would leave, and that death would pass him by this night. Terror gripped as he broke out in a cold sweat. "Come, Doctor, unless you want to die where you are," the man said to him without even turning his head from the hallway. Seeing no other choice, the doctor rose from where he had been hiding and led his captor to the lab. The doctor was sure that is where he wanted to go and was eager to save his own life if he could. Looking at the capsule holding the clone, Itten trembled in fear, the very presence of the other man chilling him to the core. "Remove the clone safely, I have need of it," the man said. Doing as he was told, Itten pressed the controls needed to safely extract the young clone from the capsule earlier than it had been set to release its occupant. This process required a security code which only he and a few others knew. When it was finished, the capsule opened, revealing the small boy, who began to wake up. Looking up at the two men, the child's eyes squinted against the light. Rising to a sitting position, it looked at them. Hearing the rustle of cloth behind him, Itten turned to see the face of his captor and gasped. The face was the same as the boy's, but unlike the child's, who knew nothing of evil. This one's eyes were merciless. As James lit his lightsaber, the older man, just out of his 40s with greying hair, could only whimper as he realised why this was happening. The rightful owner had come to retrieve his clone and kill those who had made it. James had only activated one of its blades this time, seeing no point in activating the other. With one downward slash, he had cut the man in two. Satisfied that they were all dead, having sensed no more of the medical staff or the guards, he approached his younger clone. "Come to me, Naga. That will be your name from now on. Naga Sardo, after our ancestor and my teacher. I will be your father now," James said, offering his hand. The boy unafraid took it. Looking around first after being helped out of the capsule, Naga saw all the bodies, then looked to his father. "Your first lesson, Naga. These men sought to hide you from me but failed. Failure should never be rewarded. If you allow such men to live, make sure it serves your uses, otherwise kill them quickly, thus eliminating a possible troublemaker in your future," James said. Looking into the boy's mind, he saw that the cloners had indeed been feeding him information he would need through his dreams that would help him when he woke up. Naga was able to grasp walking as well as other gestures without being told or shown. James was mildly impressed by this and made a note of it. Having already set up the explosives, James pressed the button on the handheld control, activating them and destroying the inside of the building as they sped away in a speeder back towards the city miles away. Stopping the speeder, James and Naga made their way to the ship near a collection of dunes. Naga felt something odd behind them and started to turn. "Go into the ship and do not turn around. I too sense them, but you must never allow your enemies to know such things before you are ready," James said. Nodding, Naga obeyed his father, heading up the gangplank. The plank retracted, closing the ship to the outside. His son safe for the moment, James called up the dust storm through the Force, cloaking himself from the dark Jedi who now followed. 6 of them now moved in the dust, led only by sensing him in the Force. All were surprised when James's presence suddenly disappeared. As the leader moved forward, sensing his subordinates through the Force, he noticed 2 disappear. They had been walking close together to his left. Looking in that direction to see if he could find them, with his eyes the leader saw only sand. The dust was so thick he could only see a few feet around him. He heard the others die one by one. Sometimes he almost saw the twin blades as they travelled through the sandstorm. The Dark Jedi could hardly believe anyone could be that fast and knew that he would never see or sense the strike that was going to kill him. Sure enough, he felt the blade enter his back without warning. It burned a path through him, sealing off blood vessels as it pushed through. Darkness overtook him, and he let out one last breath before death claimed him. James dropped the body in the sand, releasing the winds and allowing them to dissipate to nothing. Switching off the lightsaber in his hand, he surveyed the area. The bodies of his enemies littered the ground. Some had died by stab wounds like this one, others had been slashed or beheaded. All of them had died quickly and with no warning. By their very deaths, they were a testament to his growing strength. Every one of them had been well trained, and that had not stopped him. As the plank lowered, James left the stillness of death behind him, entering the ship so they could leave this place. Naga was brought to the temple of his namesake, and there his training in the Jedi arts began. The Sith Lord showed little kindness to the child, heartlessly and efficiently, pointing out any failing in his technique or mindset. It was James who provided encouragement, spending his time with little Naga, and patiently going over what his ghostly teacher instructed the little boy to do. James promoted creativity and the boy's passions, while the other made Naga strive for perfection. While they might in reality be clone and the original Naga looked at James as his father, just as James looked at the boy as his son. It was something that would affect Naga more deeply than it did James because he was so young. When the time came, Vader signaled James to seek out Jedi that were hiding in the Outer Rim. Happy to serve his master again, James left the boy in the care of his new teacher. Learn well from your teacher, Naga. We are all that is left of our great line. Survive and overcome every test that you are presented with, so that our line will continue to thrive and make me proud. James said, handing the boy the parts he would need to make his first lightsaber. While Naga had wielded one before, this one would be his. He would build it with his very own 2 hands, and it would stay with him perhaps for the rest of his life. Do you remember what I told you about failure? James asked. It is not to be rewarded. I will not fail, Father. I will excel at my studies and become powerful enough to one day face our enemies, Naga said as he bowed to his father. You are in good hands, my son, and already you show great potential. When your training is complete, none will be a match for you, James said, laying a hand on his son's shoulder before turning to leave, approaching the Lambda-class shuttle. James found it an odd sensation of not wanting to leave young Naga behind. He had told himself and his teacher, the Dark Spirit, that it was just to ensure the survival of his family, but it was in fact something much deeper. He actually cared deeply for the child. It was another reason for James to leave. For him, love was weakness. James's relationship with Vader had not really changed despite their long separation. While he was loyal to Vader, if he sensed any betrayal, then he would kill him. It was the way of the Sith. Loyalty only existed as long as both parties saw an advantage. Most Sith were not satisfied with simply being slaves. It was not their way. One became a Sith to embrace power. Letting his thoughts wander, they drifted back to his son. Naga was an excellent student, but quite different from his father. James attributed that to his training. His namesake was more of a cerebral assassin than James was. James was more attuned in the Force and wielded it easily. Naga, his son, on the other hand, was more technical. His technique with the lightsaber was almost flawless, and he adapted his style to match his opponents. While James felt no joy in battle or the kill, Naga enjoyed challenge even when he lost. Each lesson he stored away, waiting and watching for the chance to excel. Smiling at the thought of it, James knew that here was the makings of a perfect Dark Lord. He was dangerous because while he had pride, he was not ruled by it. Perfection in itself was Naga's goal. It was a drive that ruled his soul. In a real sense, it was his pride that drove him to it, but when push came to shove, he would do what was necessary to succeed. Ancient Sith training droids would often spar with him. In one instance, James had watched as they had levelled a dozen blaster bolts at him, and instead of deflecting them, Naga leapt for the safety of nearby cover behind a wall while pulling down the ceiling on top of the droids. In a shower of stone and mortar, those droids that were not crushed were instead pinned under their weight. Levelling his hand at the survivors, Naga reached out in the Force, crushing them as he closed his fist. Though it took time to repair the ceiling with droids, James was impressed by Naga's efficiency. Most Force users that James had encountered were too prideful to try such a thing. They would have wanted to prove that they could have beaten their enemy one-on-one, particularly those Naga's age of 6. When James asked, "Why did you not use your lightsaber to destroy them?" Dousing his lightsaber, Naga glanced at his father to his right. They might have freed themselves. Victory was more important, Naga said matter-of-factly. James could not fault his logical reasoning. Deciding that such decision-making should be rewarded, he decided to teach Naga a new style of lightsaber combat that the boy had never seen. Sith droids, completely repaired and in excellent working order, surrounded him. Centering himself in the Force, he lit only one side of his lightsaber. As the droids were activated and came to life, he charged as they tried to take aim. Twisting his body, he continued forward movement as he spun his lightsaber, contacting the first one, destroying. Changing course in another spin, he destroyed yet another. Bolts now sizzling the air as he continued spinning, destroying one after another. When the bolts began homing in on him, performed a backflip, landing behind one the droids and spinning. he used the momentum to cut the droid in half at the midsection. Performing another spin, he struck out in the force, sending another droid flying until it struck a wall, destroying it. The last one he destroyed with a front flip toward his left. Striking from right to left, he watched as the droid fell to pieces. Rising from his crouched position, James shut off his lightsaber. Naga was amazed for obvious reason. In less than a few seconds, he had destroyed several droids and not been struck even as he was moving right in front of most of them. Naga could only imagine what would have happened if they had not been spread out. His father's style would have easily killed multiple enemies in one spin. "It's a crowd killer," Naga said. "Yes, it is. While most styles have great defensive capabilities, this style does not. It's dangerous because it is so aggressive. Without focus, dizziness can overcome you and your speed can prove to be a drawback," James replied. "Because if your senses miss one, then you are vulnerable, and can miss as well as leave yourself open to attack." Naga observed his technical mind breaking the style down. Each lightsaber style has its strength. This one's greatest strength is its speed and adaptability. You can use it to dodge as well as attack. There are no blocks. If you miss, then you will suffer for your error. I created it to deal with massed opponents. You need not limit yourself to your lightsaber. It is powerful enough that you can just as easily employ a kick or punch, or even if you wish the Force itself, as I have shown you," James said. Naga and him practiced it with wooden lightsabers that they fashioned so Naga would not injure himself. Another drawback about the style was that it was difficult to train in because mistakes meant be wounded, or possibly even death. The droids would not stop just because one of their shots had hit. To design them otherwise would not be a true test besides. James called the style the whirlwind, like it appeared to be from the point of view of an outsider. In a blur of movement, the user became a whirling projectile, destroying all that was in its path. Striking at large targets, it was not meant to wound or capture, but to kill. It would take time for Naga to master it, but James knew his son would eventually succeed. One day the call came from his master to return to Coruscant, because there was much work to do. James did not respond right away because he did not want anyone to know of this world. When he was clear and far away from it, James would respond. Bidding his son farewell and that he should mind his training, James boarded his ship and took off. Setting a course, he initiated the hyperdrive. Why he chose it, James did not know, only that it felt right. While his master had recalled him to serve at his side, this force had shown him his new son, so now he would follow this path wherever it led. James landed on an outer rim planet called Derrens II. It had a few small cities and towns spread over its surface. The rest was mountains and forest, running with rivers, lakes and streams. Walking upon the surface of that world, he could feel the millions of life around him. But something was different here. Reaching out, he felt a disturbance in the Force. The cause remained hidden from him, which meant only one thing: Jedi. The Force had led him to this place, but something felt wrong. Giving himself up to the Force, he sought to sense the path that lay before. The future unfolded, but James saw for the first time two paths. It made no sense to him, for before this moment, since he had learned to harness this ability, there had only been one path to choose. Try as he might, he could not see what lay upon the other path, but he knew it was there. It frustrated him that he could not see. The blind path meant danger, and the unknown. Drawing the hood of his cloak over his head, James hid his face and made his way into the city. The streets were busy with shops and commerce. Through its bustle there were many distractions, but James's focus remained strong. The closer he came to the Jedi, the more the shroud that covered them fell away. Soon he saw each through the Force as great lamps among the populace. Tracking them, he felt them return to the spaceport where a transport waited for them. 3 human males and 1 female approached a Corellian transport disguised in plain street clothes and cloaks. One of them, the oldest, kept looking over their trouble as if sensing danger. The other 3 were new to the Force and had little training. Only Kev Tas, a middle-aged Corellian, knew of the Force. A survivor of the Great Scourge, where many Jedi had been hunted down and killed by the new Empire and its servants, he was well versed in the Jedi arts, but unlike his former fellows, he had remained hidden. He had been forced to limit his training of his young apprentices for fear that they would be sensed by those that hunted them. Kev had never seen Vader, who had once been Anakin Skywalker, a former Jedi and comrade, but Kev knew well enough that he didn't want the Dark Lord of the Sith hunting them. His plan had worked for years as he moved the group from place to place among the Outer Rim worlds, never staying in one place for too long, for fear of being discovered. But now he sensed danger. Something or someone was tracking them. Kev could not find their hunter in the Force, but he knew he was there. The older Jedi had not survived so long by ignoring his feelings and instincts. One of his students, looking back at his master as they tried to board, gasped. It was the female Twi'lek Anaya. Following her gaze, Kev saw a dark figure enter the entrance to the spaceport, his red lightsaber lit with its two blades humming, pushing back the shadowy darkness inside. Kev could feel the coldness of the individual and his evil purpose here. Kev felt the dark side swell in the stranger, offering its power to him, but for some reason the individual paused as if hesitating. Before Kev's eyes, a glowing figure appeared and stood before the stranger, its voice calmly saying, "Hello, my son." Turning toward Kev, the spirit called to him, "Come, Kev, Tas, my old friend, I would speak with you." Cautiously, Kev approached, dumbfounded, as indeed he looked on the face of his friend James Darkblade. Looking at the stranger's face, he saw the unmistakable resemblance between the two. The only real difference was that Balin had a distinguished beard and moustache, while the stranger did not. As if to comment on this, Balin said, "This is my son James. I was separated from him when he was very young by the man he now serves." James could only stand there numb with shock. Feelings of love for his father threatened to cut through his hatred and anger, piercing his mental armor. "Two paths lie before you, my boy. Which would you choose?" Balin said, looking at the young man. James's voice was barely a whisper as he said, "I can only truly see one. The other lies hidden from my sight. I am blind to its secrets." "Would you like for me to show you James?" Balin asked, his love for his son apparent on his equally handsome face. James nodded, unsure of what would happen next. "Reach out to Kev and use his strength to find the path," Balin replied. Kev could feel James's mind search for his, and he offered his strength freely, hoping only to help the son of his late friend. Aided by his added support, James saw the path and gasped as he beheld what lay upon it. He was there, and gone was the touch of the dark side, but a lighter side of the Force that he had known as a small child. In it he felt a connection to all things that he never felt before. Standing there in awe, he beheld the vision, holding his breath as if to hold on to it forever. It was a path more difficult than the one he travelled, but it offered so much more, and an end to the loneliness he had denied was in his heart. The James set upon this path was happy, almost carefree in his demeanour, where only a shadow of his former self darkened his behaviour. He knew the dark side but was no longer a part of it. He felt the touch of the light side of the Force, and it offered him its warm and welcoming embrace, and James, making his decision in that defining moment, took it. The change was sudden and earth-shaking to his little world, as all his perceptions changed. For a moment he stood there as if he were a different person. Gone was the coldness of his soul, instead a strange warmth had replaced it. "What has happened to me?" James asked, looking from one Jedi to the other. "You are awakening from a dream, my son. The nightmare is over. You now stand upon the other path." Balin replied. He turned, beholding his friend, and said, "He is again on the right path. Take him with you, for his destiny awaits. Teach him all you can, for he will need your guidance. The long night is now over, but be warned, he must not travel the ways of the Sith again, though their artifacts and writings will call to him. Through them will lie his trap. If he strays too far, the dark side will eagerly embrace him again, and the next time it will not let him go." With that, the glowing spirit of Balin Darkblade left, leaving the two men behind. James and Kev looked at each other at first, unsure of what they were supposed to do now. It was James who spoke first. "We should go. Vader will no doubt become impatient and start looking for me. The port registry has me on record. It will not take him long to track me down by simply asking for my description," James said. Kev nodded, understanding that this was true. Leading the way, he motioned for James and his Padawans to go up the gangway. The younger Jedi were surprised to note that they had the ship all to themselves. James raised an eyebrow at Kev as one of them made this observation. "They are not as well trained as you, James, nor as gifted," Kev said. Kev had already introduced all of them to each other, so James knew them all by name. Returning for his ship and bringing it back to their new home, James sat down and watched the lightsaber practice of Anaya and Sirin James studying their technique. Setting down his double-bladed lightsaber, James withdrew one which showed a white blade as he lit it. Listening to the steady hum, James strode forward toward the young people. Anaya was 17 years with blue skin, and a trim body, her head reaching about James's shoulder. Sirin was 18 and was James's height with scarecrow-like body. Both turned to face him, not understanding his purpose. As James came close to them, he suddenly charged forward, slashing at them repeatedly with his lightsaber. On the defensive, both were driven back under the sudden onslaught. Cutting at Anaya, James gave a force push with an underhand gesture at Sirin as Anaya blocked the stroke. Sirin was sent flying before landing on the floor on his back a few feet away. Focusing on Anaya, James began spinning her blade in large circles with his. Ending one of the movements with a flick of his wrist, he sent her saber flying from her fingers. Anaya stared in shock on how quick the entire move had happened. Not even their master had been able to do such a thing, and James was not even winded. "How did you do that? Can you teach it to me?" Anaya asked. Chuckling, James turned to Kev, who had been standing nearby, and said, "Master Kev, I believe I have just stolen your Padawan from you." With a shrug and a smile, Kev replied, "If you want her, you can have her." Turning back to Anaya, James said, handing Anaya her lightsaber, "I believe you could use this. Let us try again this time, focus on the moment and listen to your feelings." Squaring off with her, Sirin, Mirik and Kev watched as they began their duel. Anaya drew her other lightsaber, lighting it before James attacked. His lightsaber flashing, James attacked lightly, probing Anaya's defenses. A smirk appeared on her face as she blocked each blow. Anaya became more aggressive. Flipping over his head like an acrobat, she slashed at his back. James neatly blocked both blows with his back turned, using only one hand. As they sprang apart from each other, Anaya said, "You're toying with me, aren't you? I can feel you holding back. Please don't." "So be it," James said, giving himself up to the force. Feeling it flow through unhindered, he moved with almost impossible speed. Anaya fought as hard as she could, her twin blades twirling and cutting to no avail. When he finally made a mistake and left a hole in his guard, she struck for it only to find him dodge aside easily. A whirlwind of air suddenly caught her body, lifting her up off the ground and holding her helpless in its spiraling mass. When it just as suddenly released her, Anaya fell quickly towards the ground, only to be caught by an invisible grip right above James. "Satisfied?" James asked, a teasing look in his eyes. Breathing hard in exasperation, Anaya asked, "I am never going to beat you, am I?" Thinking about it for a moment, James said, "Anything is possible, but I doubt it." Letting her down gently, he let her feet settle down on the floor before releasing her. They practiced together many times after that, and James taught her a lot of things when it came to her lightsaber technique. Kev encouraged further training between the two, but James was never serious. Cocky and brash, he seemed to take nothing seriously. While it was true he could teach her the technique, the attitude was wrong. James had fun in everything he did, always cracking jokes and being sarcastic. "I want you to be serious, James. The place of the teacher is very important, and it should be done with a serious mind," Kev said. "Of course, Master," James said, bowing with all due humility. But as soon as Master Kev was out of sight, he winked at his apprentice, causing her to giggle. As Kev watched Anaya reach her 18th birthday, Kev became more and more concerned with the growing closeness of James and Anaya. For James, raised as he was, the thought of two Jedi forming a relationship, friendly or more than just friendly, was not unheard of. Anaya knew very little about the subject herself, so she also had no problem with it. On the other hand, Kev did. Growing up in the Jedi Temple before its destruction, Kev had been raised to form no attachments, particularly intimacy with one of the opposite sex. berating himself for not seeing this possible problem when he had put the two together. Kev did his best to have them each train, with his other two students breaking them up as master and student. James was not interested in training with his new training partner. Going through the motions, he did not feel the same connection to Sirin as he did to Anaya. After a time, he began to train more and more on his own, withdrawing from the group. Spending time on his own, James practiced his new style without the aid of a lightsaber. Practicing against prone targets, he learned to adapt his style by adjusting the strength and form of his telekinetic thrusts. James practiced for hours, enjoying the feel of the Force as he flowed through him. As his ability increased, James saw many things in the currents of the Force as he practiced alone. Pushing his body to its limits, he would often meditate on these things as he rested. It was during this time that he wished his father was still with him. But though he wished it, the spectre of his father did not appear. James was alone to study these mysteries. In the Force, he found beings and creatures that reacted differently when he sought to sense them. This piqued his curiosity and felt compelled to seek some of them out. One of them ended up being on the outer rim world he was on now. The city of Tel Nem was a small spaceport where someone either went to hide or retire. James was walking through streets wondering how he could track these creatures or beings. Locating one of the strange beings, he saw a hut. The large slug-looking creature felt different to him. His mind felt different and harder to read. Reaching out with a tentative tendril, he tried to feel for the cause of this. When he did not find it, James deepened the contact, focusing more on the other being's mind. Inside that mind, he felt mental barriers all around the conscious part of the hut's mind. James wondered about this until it occurred to him. These barriers gave the hut the ability to resist suggestion from a Force user. Near the hut, James observed something else strange as he sought to move on. Near the hut was a lizard that James could not sense at all. James could not figure out why until an idea occurred to him. While the eyes could be fooled, they could also be guided by the Force to see what could not normally be seen. Focusing with his eyes closed, he opened them, revealing a whole new landscape of colours and auras. Each being and creature was highlighted in his vision, all but one. The creature before him was surrounded by a bubble that enveloped its whole form, making it invisible from his vision. It was a blank spot in the Force that should not have existed normally, and he was fascinated by this aspect. James used this new Force sight to explore the world around him and gain knowledge of it. Travelling among the local populace, he observed deals between merchants sensing lies and falsehoods. He soon became adept at not only sensing whether they were lying or not, but actually sensing their surface thoughts. Returning to the dwelling where he and the other Jedi lived, James' mind dwelled on these discoveries, including the growing conflict between the Rebel Alliance and the Empire. Master Kev approached as he stood out on the balcony of their small home, staring up at the distant stars. "Something weighs heavily on your mind, young Darkblade," Kev said. "I am troubled by the oppression and deaths I sense." James began before a great wave of terror and despair struck, and his mind grounded in the Force had no protection against it. Master Kev clearly felt it too, but not to the same extent. While he was able to grip Plaster Barrier beside him for support, James' legs buckled under the strain of it all. Crumbling to the floor, he quickly found Kev at his side. "Focus on my voice until it passes," Kev said. James was still in a state of shock when he said, "They are gone, Master. All of them. Alderaan is gone. When I was a small child, my mother told me of that world and all its beauty. It was a world of peace. But I could hear millions of voices crying out in terror and a silence afterwards that can only belong in war." A desire rose in James to fight those that had done this, so it would not happen to other planets. "You wish to become involved," Kev said as a statement, not a question. "Did you use the Force to determine this?" James said with a smirk. "No need, my friend. I have watched closely of late." "You are uncomfortable to just stand by and watch," Kev replied. "There is something else I must do first. I must confront my son. He is like I was, a Sith. In time, he will become a powerful Sith Lord. Perhaps if I can face him now, there will be a chance to turn him," James said. "Why do I detect this will not be easy?" Kev asked. He will be well-trained and capable. If he seeks battle, I fear it will not be an easy process, but it must be done, James said. Caring deeply for the young man who had trained with his students, Kev said, "We could aid you in your quest. Perhaps together we could better succeed." At this, James shook his in disagreement. "No, Master, I cannot allow that. If I should fall, then who will carry on our traditions? I foresee many possible futures. One of the show's new Jedi who will spring from nothing across the galaxy. Many will be without teachers, and you and the others can help provide that. I will leave soon, but I will never forget you," James said. "Already you have gained a mastery in the ways of the Force, James. It is now my honor that I bestow upon the rank of Master. Farewell, Master Darkblade, and may the Force be with you," Kev said. Turning, James headed to his quarters to gather his things. When he entered, Anaya was waiting to say goodbye. The two Jedi melted into each other's arms. That night they shared many things before he left the next morning. Their love for each other was strong, but not strong enough to keep the other from their duties. Anaya was sorry to see him go, but knew that he would not let her join him. Instead, she treasured the time they had shared and would never forget it. Taking off in his shuttle, James made his way back to the dark world that held his only son, Naga. Landing on its surface, he made his way to the temple gates only to be blocked by the old guardian. "Turn back, Jedi. You no longer belong here," the Shade said. Summoning the Force in the form of the purest light, James strode forth, ignoring the spirit and watching as it dissipated before his eyes in the face of that light. As he strode to the innermost chamber, he found the ancient spirit of Naga Sadao. "I have come for my son. I wish no quarrel with you, ancestor. Please stand aside," James said, not bothering to light his lightsaber. Against a spirit, it would do no good. This was not living flesh before him. It was a ghost representing a Sith Lord who had died long ago. Only his purpose and will kept him here. James was surprised to note that the Sith Lord moved aside. "You are too late. He has gone to the inner chamber to finish his training. Once he emerges, none will be able to stop him, but you may try if you wish," Naga Sadao said. Making his way to the chamber, James found his son with an ancient Sith artifact. Drawing upon the dark side, he turned to meet his father sneering at him. James could sense the strength of the Force in him. There was no doubt that he had become much more powerful in a short time, just as James had expected. James saw that Naga was trying to use an ancient Sith holocron for something. James rushed forward, grasping the artifact. It was a dark square that seemed to absorb all light and was as big as his hand. Naga gripped it with both of his. James rushed forward, seeking to get it away from him. First, the two fought physically, tugging at it, which James was winning, being much larger than Naga, but then they fought each other using the Force. The holocron glowed, sensing the two Force users. There was a flash of light, and then a shadow of darkness that covered the whole chamber, and both of them were gone. The Sith Lord Naga Sadao smiled as he witnessed it. The trap had been laid, and now only a Sith could return from where they had gone. James would have no choice if he expected to return to this reality. Either way, one of them was sure to return, and they would fill the void in the Sith ranks that was sure to come. As James started to awaken, he heard the words, "Only a Sith can escape." Shaking away the cobwebs, James looked around. Taking in his surroundings, saw that he was on Coruscant, but as he looked about, he did notice certain differences. The uniformed troops that patrolled the city were not stormtroopers, though their uniforms were similar. Reaching out, he tried to detect the cause of all of this, and then something else caught his attention. Turning to west, he looked toward the Senate and hundreds of beings coming and going who could use the Force. The light side of the Force surrounded these individuals. James could sense them congregate in a particular structure not far from the Senate building. There was a lot of bustle as James could feel the tension in the air. Walking past a holovid screen, James saw a news report flash across it. It said that Chancellor Palpatine had been kidnapped and was being spirited off the planet. Separatist fighters appeared in the sky, strafing the streets below it. People around James dived for cover as bolts struck the ground, tearing up the street. Looking up, James shielded his body with a force shield, waiting for the right time. As the ship swooped low, he ignited his lightsaber, hurling it at the approaching ship. Guided by the Force, the weapon was like a missile, striking the Vulture droid's head and damaging it as it stuck into it. As the fighter screamed towards the Earth, James focused in, the Force grasping the ship. Using all his focus, he slowed its progress until it skidded across the ground past him to halting stop without harming anyone. Reaching out, he retrieved his lightsaber, continue on. Word reached the Jedi Council even in the commotion of a man destroying several Vulture droids using the Force. Yoda and the other members of the Council decided it would be best to find out the man was, especially since he seemed to be heading in their direction. A transport carrying Mace Windu and a few other Jedi were dispatched to make contact and bring him to the temple. They found James near the wreckage of a Vulture droid, some parts of it still twitching, as if it were still functioning. Dousing his lightsaber, James turned to them as they landed, saying, "Greetings, Master Windu. I have been expecting you." Yoda met them in the docking bay of the temple, interested to meet the strange Jedi. Upon seeing him, James bowed. "It is an honor, Master Yoda. Your prowess in the Force is even known among your enemies. I learned of your exploits when I was a child. It is good to actually meet as strange as that may seem," James said. "How come here did you?" Yoda asked. "I am uncertain, Master. Though I am certain I do not belong here. It is a long story, Master," James replied. "I am sure it is. Perhaps after Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi return with the Chancellor, we can shed some more light on the subject. We have much to attend to," Mace Windu said. He was an older man with dark skin and a clean-shaven head. At the mention of those names, James became alarmed. Everything now fell into place. He had read about it in his studies. Today was recorded in the Sith archives as the day that the Dark Lord of the Sith would use his kidnapping to sow the seeds that would turn Anakin Skywalker into Darth Vader, James' former master. "You must recall both of them, Masters. I beg of you. If you do, perhaps there is still time to avoid disaster," James said hurriedly. "Of what danger do you speak of young Jedi?" Yoda asked, concerned. "Palpatine is the Sith you are looking for. If you chase him now by sending Skywalker, you may lose the young Jedi. The two must not meet. Palpatine will use his influence with the young man in attempt to turn him. This must not happen," James answered. "How do you know this?" Mace asked. "I come from a possible future. How I came here is uncertain, but I sense I came here to serve a purpose. I have been to the future that this event will cause, and the Jedi are almost totally wiped out. Few survive, and I am one of them. My name is James Darkblade, and I know that you can sense that I am not lying," James said. "If you are indeed a Darkblade, then this is welcome news. It has been years since we have seen your kinsmen. They disappeared at the beginning of this war," Mace said, motioning for one of the Jedi nearby to carry out the order to call back the two Jedi pursuing the Chancellor. "Of Anakin you seem to know much. Who is he to you?" Yoda asked. "Anakin himself, I know only what history tells. It is Vada that I know well. In my reality, he helps the Emperor hunt down and destroy the Jedi Knights. When the Emperor takes control of the galaxy, Darth Vader takes his place as Dark Lord of the Sith," James said. "Who was this Vader you speak of?" Yoda asked. "A Jedi Knight turned to the dark side who betrayed and murdered Anakin Skywalker," James answered. "You seem very familiar with him." "Why is that?" Mace asked. "He was my master before I returned to the ways of the Jedi. I was his apprentice," James said, admitting all. "A long story indeed, I would imagine, young Darkblade. Perhaps in light of recent events it would be best to hear it now," Yoda said. Mace nodded and led James to the council chambers. When James was finished with the detailing the major events of history that they needed, Yoda said, "A dark tale you speak of, Darkblade. We must meditate on it further, but before we do much, we still wish to learn about you." "Ask your questions, Masters. I have nothing to hide," James said. How came you the abilities you displayed in destroying the separatist fighters attacking you? Yoda asked. I learned much of my training on my own, Master. Just like you, the Masters of old, I have developed my own style and talents. We each deal with the Force in our own way, learning from its wisdom. In this way, I am no different than any other, James replied. True, it is the way of the Jedi to find our own truths in our studies of the Force. Still, your talents are unique, Mace said. My childhood was unique, Master, as is my connection to the Force. The only ones like myself I would imagine would be my family, who have long since gone into hiding until all is well. Even in times of safety, we Darkblades have a history of reclusion. Necessity and a desire to stretch myself was the cause for my talents. My lightsaber style is well suited for killing, but I cannot use it effectively otherwise. That is its limitation. It is an excellent technique that is difficult at best for anyone else to use, but I am well suited for, James replied. Interesting, James. We will speak of this another time, Mace said. James left them to their deliberations. He too had much to meditate on. It was Yoda who came to him watching as James practiced without the aid of a lightsaber. In the whirlwind technique, many things came to him, and his mind became clear, carried by the eddies of the Force. His mind focused. James saw his predicament and made a fateful decision. Finishing the last movement of his exercise, he turned to Yoda, his body covered by sweat. An interesting technique you have. Much in the way of speed it has. As you said, only a few may use it, Yoda said, studying the young man. James smiled, bowing, acknowledging the compliment. It lacks precision when used with a lightsaber, so I cannot wound my opponents. It is a lethal technique in that case. I trained this way to find another way to use it. Long did I study the masters of old before I came up with it. It works best when dealing superior numbers, James replied. Yoda nodded at this in agreement. Decided have you your future here? Yoda asked. James marvelled at the little green creature. In him he sensed great power, but also a great grounding in the Force. There was awesome presence in Yoda that James had never felt before, and in a way that he envied. I cannot return to my reality without going down a path I must not go. It is a dark path that I have already walked and do not wish to return to. It will consume me as it did before, and the spirit of my father may not be able to save me this time, James said. Passed into the Force your father did, Yoda observed from his comment. Yes, Master, he was killed in what we call the Great Scourge. The Emperor, recognizing the danger of the Jedi, hunts them down, as I have said. I was born towards the end. For most of my early life I was running. I lost my father, my mother, and the rest of my family. In the end, when Vader turned me, he was the only family I had, James said. A sad past you had, Darkblade. Much have you learned from it, Yoda said. A pained expression came over James' face. I tell you the truth, Master. Though my last master, a good Jedi who survived the Scourge, called me Master, I wish I could forget all that made me so powerful. I wish I had been a Jedi, and only that. If it would have taken me longer to reach this point, I would have been satisfied, James said. Come, Darkblade, sit with me now. Let us speak more, you and I, Yoda said. The whispers began again. Dark whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. James had become quite used to them by now, and knew how to get rid of them. Sitting down, he let himself slip deeper into the Force, enveloping himself in it. Only the presence of another entering the room ended his meditation. The new arrival was Master Windu. The council will meet here tomorrow. You are to attend, Mace said. James was left wondering what he meant. Deciding to get some rest, he prepared for bed. James awoke to a sense of danger. As he got up, he could hear Jedi rushing here and there throughout the temple. Their shouts and hurried steps showed their urgency. James could sense a large contingent of troops heading towards the temple. Even if the Jedi could fight them off, more would come. Preparations were being made to leave that much he could sense by the thoughts of the others. Dressing, James headed toward the main entrance to the temple. On his way to the entrance, he met Anakin and Master Obi-Wan. James recognized both immediately from visions of Vader's past. "Where are you going?" "The Council has ordered that every Jedi evacuate the temple. Transports are being loaded as we speak," Obi-Wan said. "Then go to them by all means. My destiny lies out there. I will guard you rear flank as best I can. You should leave with the rest," James said. "We'll go with you," Anakin said, insistent. Obi-Wan nodded, adding, "Anakin is right. You cannot face them without help. We will join you." Heading through the great doors of the temple's entrance, James replied, "You may come if you wish, but I suggest you stay back. To do otherwise will only hinder me and may cause you harm." That said, James continued towards the marching clone troopers. Most of them were surprised to note 3 Jedi coming towards them. Surely, if this was supposed to be a defending force, more were needed. The rest had seen Jedi in action and knew the 3 to still be dangerous. Summoning gusts of wind, James thrust them against the oncoming troops, slowing their progress to a crawl. Most fought desperately not to be blown off the platform they were on, hanging over empty space. Igniting his lightsaber, James charged forward, executing his first sweeping turn, letting himself go in the Force. He felt it fill his limbs, speeding his movements and presenting him with the targets he needed. James' blurring blade moved too fast for the eye to easily track as it carved a path through the enemy ranks. Some fell off the sides, crying out, while others were knocked off by James's force pushes. The troops, tightly packed, were more dangerous to themselves than they were to him. They had to aim lest they hit their brothers, while James had only enemies around him. Anakin and Obi-Wan stood back as they were told, deflecting stray shots fired in their direction. When it was all over, James stood alone among the dead troopers. Anakin and Obi-Wan could only look on in shock. "How did you do that?" Anakin asked, his eyes wide. "Many things are possible through the Force, young master. Come, we should go. The last transport is leaving and more troops are coming." Heading back in a rush, Anakin and Obi-Wan stopped short as they found James facing Count Dooku. "Greetings, Darth Tyrannus," James said. The Sith raised an eyebrow. "You know my name, yet I do not recognize you." "What might your name be?" Dooku said. "I won't let you take him," James simply replied. "I don't see how you can stop me. Come, Anakin, my master has great plans for you," Dooku said, turning to the young man with a smile. Igniting his lightsaber, James placed himself between Dooku and Anakin. "You'll have to kill me first, Count. Go around the long way, young master. You and Obi-Wan both," James said. "Why do you call me that?" Anakin said, hesitating. Smiling while still keeping his eyes on Dooku, James answered, "Because that is what you are to me. Where I come from, it was I who served you, my Dark Lord and Master. I was your apprentice, though I knew you by another name, Darth Vader. Now you must go. I will not allow that future to come to pass. Right now it is all that matters to me." With Obi-Wan's urging, Anakin was led away, leaving the 2 adversaries alone. "An interesting revelation. A pity that it will not save you. My master only wants Anakin, so you are merely a hindrance," Dooku said, lighting his own saber. "I might just surprise you," James said with a cocky smile. He let Dooku attack, countering his blows neatly and easily. Breaking contact, James said, "No wonder Palpatine chose to replace you with Anakin. You have barely an inkling of his potential. Soon he would be able to dispose of you himself without you holding back. You were simply too foolish to realize Palpatine had used you." James's words unsettled Dooku as they started to make sense. Looking back at everything, the pieces all fell into place. Sensing that Dooku had finally realized what had happened, James said, "Your master has abandoned you, Sith apprentice. You can either choose to rejoin the light and face your crimes, or face your inevitable demise. I offer you this one chance to surrender. After that, I will no longer hold back." It was then that Dooku felt the icy cold touch of fear. Was James bluffing, or could he really beat him? Calling upon the dark side. Dooku let loose bolts of lightning from his fingertips. James did not even move as they splashed harmless on a shield he erected around himself. "May I take that as your answer?" James said, unperturbed. "Let us see what skill you have with your lightsaber, young one. I have given you my answer," Dooku said. He barely had enough time to block as James launched his first attack. "Passion is weakness, Dooku. You are not strong. While your anger fills you, I need only peace. While fear guides your movements, I need only serenity. And while you feel only hatred, I only feel the Force," James said. As James spun out of the way of one of Dooku's strikes, he sent a force push into the Count's face, sending him reeling. His defenses open, James cut through his side as he passed, then stabbing backwards. He did not need to turn to see that he had delivered a death blow to the Count. Instead, he simply removed the blade, letting Dooku slip to his knees before he took his head, ending the man's pain. "It seems I have killed you as my master did, but I will not take Vader's path. I have my own to walk," James said to the body before he turned and left. The transport waited for him, and he was the last one to board before they took off. Anakin, he knew, would have many questions, and James would do his best to answer. If nothing else, he would now be safe for the moment. As James stood looking out of one of the viewports, James meditated on all that had happened. A dark dream disturbed him during his slumber. In it, he had fully embraced the dark side, taking his place as Dark Lord. The Emperor fell before him, slain by his lightsaber. A visible aura of darkness surrounded James as he stood surrounded by kneeling Jedi with Yoda and Mace Windu in the forefront. Naga, his son, also knelt, paying homage to his father and master. The galaxy belonged to James, and none could hope to challenge him. James awoke from his dream, his mind still reeling with the pure seduction of it. Sweat covered him and his body trembled. His nerves shot. His breathing was ragged and his mouth was dry. He sensed a presence in the room and sat up slowly, his head still dizzy. "Difficult it is for you, this struggle of yours. Worse it is getting, but still you resist. Tiring it must be," Yoda said, standing at the doorway, his voice filled with concern. James barely managed to get out of bed, struggling with great effort. His body was still weak, but his mind was sharp. "It calls to me still even now. I feel I will never be rid of it," James replied. "Much you have sacrificed to be a Jedi," Yoda said. "But is it enough? I can sense the fear in the other Jedi about me. I cannot change the past, Master Yoda, none of us can," James said. Taking a deep breath, James felt the soft, soothing touch of the light side pushing away all his problems and leaving only peace in its wake. "It is true that I have gained much in return, though. There are times in which I feel one with every living thing connected to the Force. When that happens, I feel truly at peace. It saddens me when that feeling goes away and I must see to other things," James said. "Your ability it is to sense things that has saved so many thus far, James. Much help I believe you can offer for the future," Yoda said. James noticed that he had been called by his first name by the old master, and took it as good sign. "Thank you, Master, but I am unworthy of your praise. I have done what I can. There is still much we must do," James replied. "True indeed, James. Come, the council meets," Yoda said. James followed him to a separate room down a long hall where most of the council sat. Some were missing, lost in the growing conflict as the Emperor and his new apprentice hunted down the Jedi. James had felt their passing into the Force as surely as if he had been there. Even now their faces were burned into his memory. "To the point we will come, Master Darkblade. Comes to us news of other council members falling in battle. Aware you are of it, I am sure," Yoda said. James only nodded, indicating he had indeed. "Voted the council that you join it as one of its new members," Yoda said. Bowing, James said, "I am ill-suited to such a task and would be a poor choice. As such, I must regretfully decline." Bowing again, James turned and left the room. Obi-Wan was the first to speak, being newly elected to the council. "Why would he decline such an honour?" Obi-Wan asked. "Sense he does the distrust of others directed at him." some among the council members assembled here. This, I believe, is the leading reason for refusing the honoured position being offered him. Yoda answered. He did not have to look at Mace to indicate that the other master was one of those who didn't trust James. Master Windu, thinking it over, spoke up. There is too much power in him for one man to wield. There will always be the temptation to use it. He also has never trained another Jedi as far as we know. Every member of this council has had one Padawan as is customary by our traditions, Windu said. A dangerous time for Jedi Darkblade comes from. Understandable are his powers in that context. There only the strong or the unnoticeable survive. Many fallen Jedi he described in the future, and many more turning to the dark side. A young boy he was when turned to the ways of the Sith by Vader. Made for it he was, as his master discovered. Both sides of the Force now seek to claim him. The dark side offered him a temptation in a dream. Saw it I did as he slept. A powerful vision it was. Close has my connection to Master Darkblade become that I was able to see it for myself, Yoda replied, sitting there in his chair. What was in this dream? Obi-Wan asked. The galaxy he was offered, and bowing to him all of us were. Naga his son also bowed as his apprentice once again. Great was Darkblade's power, the dark side surrounding him like an aura visible for all to see. A vision of the future this all was, if James would again the mantle of Sith, as the dark side believes he was born to be. It would make him Dark Lord of the Sith, and offer him endless power. The Emperor himself would fall before him dead by his lightsaber, Yoda answered. A disturbing dream. But what of the light side of the Force? Mace asked. Strong in the ways of the Jedi James has become. Stronger still he will grow, I foresee, but at a slower pace. Quicker he would grow in power as a Sith and far more dangerous. The fastest way to power it will always be for him and risks much less. Care for little he did as a Sith, now much he has come to care for. Much he has given up to be with us and walk as a Jedi. Fault him not for his past we should not, Yoda said. Seeing the wisdom in Yoda's words, Mace said, I'll speak to him. You are right, of course. We could use him in these dark times. Perhaps he could shed more light on our present situation, Mace said. Know much he already does more than anyone else thinks. Sensed he has the falling of many Jedi. Sees too much indeed he does. Feels the pain of each that fall and their passing into the Force. Growing worse it is. Worried for him, am I? Yoda said. James felt Mace's approach and turned towards him. Yes, Master Windu? James asked with raised eyebrows. We should talk, you and I. I realise that we come from different times. Due to that fact, we have different viewpoints, but the Council could greatly benefit from your insight, Mace said. I have no wish to conform to your rules, and I like my freedom. You can easily find a better choice among the other survivors, James replied. Smiling, Mace said, Somehow I doubt that. I have known Master Yoda for a long time. In all that time, he has rarely been wrong in judging someone's character. He was even against the training of Anakin, as you know. We are both aware of what could have happened. And what could still happen, Master. It is one of the reasons I am hesitant to join you. Anakin would have gotten better advice if he had not had to hide his love of Senator Amidala, James said. Then you should talk to him. It would be best coming from you, but do not think that we would not listen to your counsel. It is the reason why the council was formed in the first place. So many different views could be heard. We are like the democracy we seek to protect, Mace said. James's gaze was distant, but he heard Master Windu's words. I will consider what you have said, but first I must see my former master, James said. It was not something he looked forward to, but it had to be done. James held a piece to the puzzle that Anakin did not realise. In it was a possible future that James would see that the young man not suffer through. James found Anakin meditating alone. Sensing his presence, Anakin looked up, saying, Greetings, Master Darkblade. May I help you? Chuckling, James replied, Actually, my young master, it is I who have come to help you. Please take my hand. I would show you something. Unsure of what he meant or why he would still call him master, Anakin did as he was asked. Taking James's offered hand, Anakin saw a stream of images and events. All of them had him in it. It was him as Vader, who would eventually take a young man named James as his apprentice. Anakin saw it all, even his part in Padmé's death. When James released him, Anakin's body shook with the horror of what he had seen. In the vision, he had fallen so far that he barely recognized himself. It was the recognition of what he saw that was familiar in Vader that bothered him the most. Anakin would have rather not felt a connection to Vader, but he saw the truth. "I did all that?" Anakin asked. "Yes, you did, my master. The events as they have unfolded now have given you a second chance to ensure they do not happen. Do not hold on to Amidala too tight. To do so will only bring about the events that I have just showed you. You taught me much in those years. The death of Amidala affected you greatly, and you hated yourself. You thought that you had killed her, and in a way you did. She lost the man she loved, and saw the Republic falling to pieces around her. In the end, it was too much to bear, and she lost the will to go on. In the time to come, the twins she carries and many other children will be needed. They will be the first of a new order as the Jedi seek to survive. Love Anakin, but do not lose yourself doing it. You are an admirably man. I, more than anyone else, know that. It was not hate or fear that brought you to the dark side, but your unwillingness to lose her. When it was all said and done, you lost her anyway. Learn from this young master, and be the father and husband I know you can be." James said, leaving him to think it over. Already he could sense the shift in Anakin's path.
Anakin would not become Vader, especially when it meant losing the people he loved. Now there was no need to hide. The council knew of his marriage to Senator Amidala. James managed to convince them to let her join her husband. With the young couple reunited, James took his place on the council, a new voice with new ideas.
James believed the Jedi should take the fight to the new Empire as their only hope for survival. "So you would have the Jedi become warriors," Mace said. "Dangerous this is for a Jedi. Much darkness there is in war. Sensitive to it, many Jedi are," Yoda added. "Would this council prefer that we would quietly become extinct? You will pardon me if I do not wish other members of this council to join those who are already dead." James responded, "The Jedi have been the guardians of peace and justice for more than a millennia. You would have us become warriors? The past has shown this is not a wise action. Civil war among the Jedi themselves has been the result," Mace said. "I do not ask any to follow me. I shall go alone and help the massing rebel forces however I can. I would not have them fight the war we should be fighting alone. The Sith must be destroyed. Who better than the Jedi to do it?" James said. With that, James left to lead the rebels against the Emperor. A transport docked with a Corellian corvette where rebels were waiting. A number of senators were there, brought there by promises that a Jedi Master would be helping them. During his passage to the rendezvous, James had been studying the web that made up the universe. It was a pattern that seemed to connect so many things. He could feel the clone troops and the Imperial fleet approaching. They too were connected to the web as well as something else. Feeling for it in the Force, he found the Emperor connecting them and strengthening their focus. It occurred to James if the Emperor could do such a thing, then so could he, especially when the rebels would be quite willing to have his help. Already he focused on the web of individuals linking as they went through battle drills of each ship. Hands and bodies moved more efficiently. Their minds were suddenly free of all distractions, almost predicting the other's movements. James could feel each now his mind dwelling on their cares and worries, gently causing them to evaporate. This was how a Jedi should fight. Not merely by leading them into battle, but protecting those they fought with and nurturing their strength. A Sith could never understand this. For them, only the strong survived. If one was weak, they were quickly removed, being considered a weakness in the chain. As James continued his Jedi battle meditation, he could feel the weakest links among them perform better, adding to the whole. Never in his life had he felt such wholeness. He was part of something, a part of them. It was not for power that he did this, but to aid them, making it all the more pure. It was a profound moment in James's life, where all the connections he had seen made sense and the galaxy opened itself to him. When the drills were over, he was reluctant to let them go, but he knew he must. He could not remain so much a part of them forever. To do so would be selfish, and he would be no different than the Sith. When he opened his eyes, he sensed those around him watching in wonder. They all had wondered what he had been doing, but had felt the sudden connection to each other. Sentences had been completed before they had been spoken by their originators, and all had looked to him. James had seen the images floating in glowing white light. The light seemed to permeate him, spreading to his very core. James did not realize that others could see this light. They watched in awe as the glow surrounded him, causing him to shine before their eyes. James now was witnessing them, staring in the aftermath. "Something wrong?" James asked, studying their faces. Looking at the others, Bail Organa stepped forward. "You were glowing, Master Jedi." James looked to the others for confirmation. They all nodded, showing they had seen him like that. James found this curious. Had he had more time, he might have gone into it in more detail. Unfortunately, time was of the essence. Already the fleet was getting ready to jump to hyperspace. Some Jedi would have withdrawn to meditate, but James felt that was not right. One of the reasons the Jedi were on the run was because of just that. Too long had they separated themselves from those they fought alongside and protected. It acted as a double-edged sword, making them legendary and mysterious among their enemies, but their would-be allies did not know them. Many in the galaxy saw little difference between them and the Sith. James meant to change that. In the days that followed, that was his goal. Walking among the crew, he took part in many staff meetings among the fleet, and out with many of the crews of the fleet, travelling from ship to ship. He wanted to get to know the people he would be serving with, and they him. James was an easy person to deal with. He was pleasant to be around and a good listener. He seemed interested what they did on the ship, and in his free time learning their jobs. James was a quick learner and impressed the crew members. The command staff were also impressed by his foresight and how well their people performed in battle. The Imperial Navy was sent on a wild goose chase as James was able to sense weaknesses in their patrols. Imperial shipyards were destroyed across the galaxy. Once the support structure supporting the Empire was gone, the rebels began attacking the Imperial fleet itself. The Emperor was forced to recall his fleet to Coruscant, where they made their last stand. In this battle, the Emperor felt James's arrival. Now the two Force users pitted their wills and abilities against each other. It was a long and costly battle, which ended with James as the victor. Never before had the Emperor encountered a Jedi with such power, and seemed to match his every move, as if he knew what he was thinking. When the Emperor tried to change tactics and focus on one particular part of his battle line, James focused on that same area. The rebel commanders, trusting their Jedi friend, poured all they could into the fight, finally breaking through the enemy lines. When that happened, they encircled and destroyed the Imperial fleet once and for all. As the Emperor turned to escape in those final moments in a shuttle that was waiting for him and his new apprentice, he was stabbed in the back just as he shifted focus away from the battle. A red blade appeared through his chest, and he turned to see his killer as it was withdrawn. Naga smiled, saying, "Just as I had foreseen, my master, you have failed and shown your weakness. Now it is my turn to take up the mantle of Dark Lord. With you shall die your pitiful empire, as it should be giving rise to my own. An empire of shadow, untouchable and unconquerable. This is my vision, and you were the last obstacle. My father and his Jedi will be too busy with you to stop me. Now die, fool Emperor, and pave the way to my future." With an evil laugh lighting streaked from his fingertips, and Emperor Palpatine died screaming. Heading towards the shuttle, Naga smiled yet again at what he had already learned from the old Sith. Already, Palpatine had begun to discover the secrets of immortality. A secret Naga himself would finish learning. Allowing Palpatine to finish his work would have been a threat to Naga. If he died, then he could come back. Right then, Palpatine had been mortal, and the time to strike had come. as rebel troops began to land on Coruscant. Naga escaped unnoticed as other Imperial ships also sought to escape. The rebels were too busy taking the planet to notice all the escaping traffic. James knew that if his son was on one of those ships, he would never know. Like him, Naga knew how to hide himself unless you were looking directly at him. The rebels were very satisfied with the victory. Coruscant was taken soon afterwards, and the rebel forces established a garrison there. James was named a hero of the New Republic, who were determined not to make the same mistakes as the old. James did not care about glory or rewards, but saw the necessity in it. People needed heroes in dark times. James accepted his award, bowing humbly to Bail Organa, his new friend who had been chosen to give it to him. Senator Amidala and the rest of the Senate all showed up to witness the ceremony. After the award ceremony that the rebels insisted on, James was asked to have the Jedi return to again aid them like before the war. The first session of the New Republic Senate would begin soon, and many delegates would be happy to see the Jedi return. Already reports of the rebels' victories were spreading across the galaxy. More importantly, it showed a single Jedi ready to fight for the promise of freedom. Already the Emperor had begun limiting the freedoms of many worlds before he was defeated. It was these things that Bail Organa and other Senate leaders spoke of when they asked for the return of the Jedi. "I will speak with the Jedi Council. It will be their decision on what they wish to do," James promised. Senator Amidala, looking forward to seeing Anakin again and giving him the good news, offered to take James back to the academy. James happily accepted the invitation and boarded her ship. Upon his return, James was shown to the council in their chambers. "Returned Master Darkblade has," Yoda said. "Yes, already stories of his heroism are spreading even among the Jedi. It seems that some believe his feats should be entered in the annals of the Jedi Order," Mace added. "I did not come here to seek praise or speak of any acts of heroism, save for the gentle beings I fought alongside. It was their acts of self-sacrifice that allowed our victories. I merely did what I could to help influence the outcome. I deserve no medals and would not have asked for any. The New Republic Senate asks that the Jedi return to help aid them in this time of transition." James replied plainly. "Much has changed in you, I sense, Master Darkblade," Yoda said. Nodding, James said, "My eyes have been opened to much that remained hidden to me before I left, but my views have not changed. I am more resolute than ever that the Jedi Order must change or suffer the same crushing defeats again and again. Next time, perhaps, it will not be able to recover." Yoda looked at Mace, nodding. "We will consider your words as a member of this council. A new voice can be a welcome change to any democracy. For this new future, you propose a new voice may be required if you would wish to see it done," Mace said. "It seems that I have little choice than to accept the inevitable," James said with a smile. Bowing before the Jedi Council, James said, "I accept the responsibility I am being offered, and promise to do my best not disappoint my fellow Jedi." True to his word, James stuck by his beliefs. His views proved to the voice of change among the Jedi. His arguments were wise and well thought, leaving little opposition. Slowly but surely, many Jedi began not only to return to Coruscant to rebuild the Jedi Temple, but new academies were built on many different worlds. It was James's belief that the Jedi should be more accessible to the people they meant to protect and help. It would go a long way to gaining the trust of the galaxy as a whole. Now people need not come to Coruscant itself if they needed help now. They could choose to go instead to Jedi stationed nearby as new Jedi were trained. Many returned to their homeworlds. Now almost every planet had at least one Jedi that seemed to be looking after them and knew their culture. Those people no longer saw the Jedi as troublemaking outsiders, but as people interested in their welfare. Tradition, while still held in great respect, did not always have to be adhered to based on merit. Strangely enough, James did bring back certain traditions as a new voice. James re-established a library on Ossus, a site where the ancient library of the Jedi had existed. There he invited many Jedi scholars to share knowledge, openly recording them for all Jedi to know. He would have been content to live that way forever. The life of a scholar seemed to suit him just as the life of a warrior had. All scholars were trained at Ossus from then on, before moving on to other places or deciding to stay at the library. Many fine scholars decided on the latter of the two, finding it to be a good place to store and pass on knowledge. Many Jedi came to Ossus when they could not find it at the Jedi Temple or their own academies. James found himself going over many Jedi texts, both copied and new. Other times he meditated on the flow of the universe, writing down all that he had learned. It was during one of these days of study and deep meditation that he received a visit from Master Yoda. "Greetings, Master. To what do I owe the pleasure?" James asked, meeting him at the landing pad set in a beautiful garden. Using his walking stick, the old Jedi greeted him in return, replying, "Happy I am to see you again, Master Darkblade. Missed you we have at the Jedi Council." Leading the way to the library, James said, "I thought it best to leave wiser beings to such tasks. I am quite happy here." "Happy for you I am, James. Another reason I have come for. A young Jedi in need of training heard have I that you have taken on. Killed in the war her master was," Yoda said. "I am doing my best, Master Yoda. She seems quite gifted from what I can sense. There is certainly a lot of potential," James replied. Yoda could not help but smile at the fact that James's senses were as keen as ever. "Before meeting the Padawan, may we discuss your ability to gather information on the Sith? Well organised and secure this information seems. Found many dark Jedi with it we have in recent months. Testing us your son Naga seems to be," Yoda said. "Yes, Yoda. There is a reason why our information is so good. I have brought back an old part of the Order from more than a millennia ago. In that time, the Jedi had members who were specialised in weeding out the dark side as well as other threats to the Jedi and in the Old Republic. They lived in the shadows, seeking out our enemies wherever they hid themselves. My family long served the Jedi in this function. I thought it only proper to bring the tradition back. These new Jedi can remain hidden, acting as ordinary citizens to find danger and report back here through secure channels. All records from their reports are kept here in the library, and those that require Jedi intervention are reported to the Council," James replied. "And those that do not?" Yoda asked, pausing in front of the doors to the library. He looked up at James for the answer to his question. "I have had my agents find discreet ways of tipping off the local law enforcement without blowing their covers. So far there has been little trouble with the arrangement," James answered, returning his gaze calmly. "Interesting it is to hear, James. Pass this on to the Council, I will," Yoda said. "I hope I have not overstepped my bounds in the Council's eyes," James said. "Imply you do that you would stop if you had?" Yoda asked. "On the contrary, it would simply be regrettable. I need not create unnecessary opposition, especially among such esteemed Jedi," James said. "Humility with me is not required, Master Darkblade. Know I do that you refuse to do what is popular when you see an unpopular choice is necessary. Your record speaks for itself, it does," Yoda said. Smiling, James said, "I suppose I have never made my opinions secret." Chuckling, Yoda said, "That you never have, James. Your way it is not." As they walked down the beautiful halls of the library works of art in themselves, they spoke of many things. The relationship between the two Jedi had never truly faded. If James had looked to Vader as his surrogate father, then Yoda was his surrogate grandfather. What was even more amazing was that Yoda seemed to have great respect for the headstrong Jedi Master, as did the rest of the Council. They came upon Della as she practiced her flips. Leaping through the air, she flipped backwards, using force to launch herself back in the air as she neared the ground, and executing a final flip before coming to a landing. In time, she will be able to complete 3 more in turn with little effort, James said. "That much faith you have in her?" Yoda asked. "I should. She is my niece. We have a knack for pushing preconceived limits. It is what has made us outsiders as far back as we can remember," James answered. "Sure are you?" Yoda asked, surprised. "I am a Darkblade master. I recognize the basic elements of her style. Darkblades are very free-thinking. Our teachings promote this, that nothing is accepted at face value. We are taught to explore every nuance and every possibility. Knowledge of the undiscovered is our goal. I have tried to place much of my family's knowledge in texts for all to see, but much has been lost, James said. A young tan-skinned Twi'lek Jedi just out of his teens joined them, whispering into his ear, his green skin catching the light overhead. Nodding, Yoda motioned him to leave. "Arrived for you. More books have I brought. The lost knowledge you seek, I believe. An unidentified source sent it to the Jedi Temple," Yoda said. Loads of books were being moved into the library on repulsor carts. James picked off one of the books and gasped. "This is a copy of our patriarch's memoirs. I remember seeing the original when I was a child. It was handwritten in ancient Sith. All of my family was taught how to read it," James said. "A useful skill, I would imagine, given your family's history. Still dangerous it is," Yoda said. "Knowledge can be dangerous sometimes. It is also why we Darkblades have seen every Sith war coming before it's too late and left avoiding it. Even after the Clone Wars, we were among the last to be exterminated among those who did not turn away from the Force," James said. It was a hard thing to think that all he had left of his family were these books, his niece and his son who was now his enemy. "My brother Bellum's daughter was born into a family of outcasts," James said, his eyes downcast with shame. It was a rare moment that James showed to few outsiders. Yoda realized this and spoke up. "A family by all accounts helped many. Other Jedi begun, they have to reappear, escaping the Emperor and his apprentice thanks to your family and their efforts on the other Jedi's behalf. They, however, will not return for some time. My family will make sure it is safe first. They can still sense the powerful presence of the dark side even if they can't find its source. Once it disappears, they will come out of hiding," James said. Nodding, Yoda said, "Turn to more pleasant matters we should." They both watched Della finish her exercises ending in 2 flips before making a perfect landing. "You have improved, Della, but let us test how much farther you can push yourself. Attack me with your lightsaber," James said. Della hesitated before activating her lightsaber, especially after seeing him not take his off his belt. James charged forward without warning, catching her by surprising. Trying to counter with a swipe of her lightsaber, she found him much faster. Striking with telekinesis, he sent her flying backwards. Executing a flip, she landed on her feet in a crouch, her eyes wide. The Force does not merely guide a Jedi's lightsaber. It provides him or her with a defense even without it. Never assume that someone is defenseless. A Jedi needs only the Force, and they can achieve things thought to be impossible. Now continue your attack, this time without your lightsaber, and let the Force guide you," James said. While Della could not hope to defeat James, yet she began to understand the lesson he was providing her with as she executed each motion. There was a freedom in not being limited to the classic Jedi weapon. She found that her strikes could be controlled, and each move flowed into the next. Watching the two, Yoda couldn't believe he hadn't seen the resemblance. Both had that same unpredictability to their movements. Their style was free of any set form, and then there was their eyes. Both had the glint of joy as they sparred, enjoying the moment. They lived in the Force and felt at home with it. Seeing them perform against each other, there was no denying it. Della was indeed a Darkblade. Della moved with her uncle, trying to match him and force a mistake, but he was always one step ahead of her. His movements were graceful and perfectly balanced like a dancer. He made it seem so effortless while sweat poured off her body, soaking her clothes. Her uncle was a master of this dance. It was an art form in which he could freely express himself without holding back. Della was disappointed when it ended. James had her go change and begin her studies while he spoke to Yoda as they toured the halls of the library. "A question I have. How is it that she came here?" Yoda asked. Pausing for a moment, James looked down at the older Jedi, saying, "That, my friend, is a question that seems to elude me. I see a dark wall much like the one you described years ago every time I try to find the answer. For the first time, I cannot see the entire picture. I see a Mandalorian, a smuggler, Della and myself, and..." James stopped suddenly, his eyes widening. "What is the problem, James?" Yoda asked. "Another Darkblade," Someone else is alive from my time period. I see him here in this reality, James said joyously at first, then his face grew somber. A problem there is, James? Yoda asked, concerned that it should have been a happy moment. Merely a concern that I have been wrestling with, James replied. Something to do with your niece? Yoda asked. Yes, Master, the question remains, how did she get here? Every time I search for the answer, I receive the same images. A smuggler, a Mandalorian, Della and myself. I see each person, but never why they appear to me. Something tells me this is a future event. It is just a feeling, but it is strong, James said. Elusive the future can be, but strange indeed that you cannot see it. Yoda said, describe to me what you see. The smuggler and the Mandalorian are friends. I see a spaceport where we meet them. I don't know where it is, but we are searching for something or someone. Beyond those images, I see only darkness and nothingness. Something is blocking my ability to see, James said. A choice it seems you have made already, James. Hinder you, I will not in your decision. Stubborn you Darkblades are, and I grow tired of trying, Yoda said with a smile. James nodded, saying, You could say that, Master. Yoda left it at that, leaving James to his privacy. The two Jedi said goodbye, and Yoda left, returning to Coruscant. James turned to Della, raising an eyebrow as she stood directly behind him. I sense you wish to tell me something, James said. Nodding, Della said, The one you spoke of is my brother Bell. He is the reason I am here. I came here to save him after all of the rest were dead. We thought we were alone. Bell was filled with such hatred and anger against Darth Vader and the Empire. He wanted to become strong so he could crush the man who was responsible for the slaughter of our family one by one. Seeing it even before she said it, James interrupted her, saying, Went there to turn him back to the light side of the Force. Sighing, James said, It seems that we have both repeated the same mistake, and I predict we will have to meet our other two family members again. Until that time, we have more training to do. But I thought you said I should study, Della said as both watched Yoda's shuttle take off. You still have much to learn before we leave, James said, activating his lightsaber. That day began what seemed like many months of training rolled into one. At the end, Della knew more than she ever had before, and anyone other than her uncle wouldn't have known her, and James, as it was, barely recognized her. Even now she stood in the courtyard involved in her final test. Somewhere inside the tiny sandstorm that surrounded her, Della's uncle prepared to strike. She felt his movement, and even before she realized it, Della moved to counter it. A blade crashed against hers and her master stood before her. Dissipating the sandstorm, it cleared around them. Well done, my niece. You have come a long way in such a short time. Confer upon you the rank of Jedi Knight I do. You have begun your first steps into a much larger world, James said, smiling proudly at her as he sheathed his blade. Della returned it, bowing in acceptance. There was no doubt that she had earned it. It had been a tiresome road, but now she felt confident that she could join her master in their quest. Leading the way, James headed to his shuttle that would take them to a nearby world. From there, they would follow the path the Force laid out for them. James Grimm and Derlin Quoll were docking at the spaceport of Daranda 2. The two men had been friends since childhood. Derlin had saved Grimm from a gangster who had been angry at him for losing a shipment on his first voyage. Grimm had more than made up for it many times afterwards. Saving the other man's life was sort of a game between the two friends. Even now they kept a running score. Right then, Grimm was down on his luck. Unfortunately, Dorba the Hutt had finally caught up with them. His men had virtually crippled their ship, the Mantell Moon, originally registered on their home planet of Ord Mantell. The repairs were extensive and would cost them money they didn't have. He was surprised to find two Jedi walk into the cantina asking for him and Derlin by name. As far as he knew, he had never pissed off any government officials or gotten in trouble with the local law. He didn't bother even reaching for his blaster, nor did Derlin. Both had heard about others who tried something that stupid, Neither wanted to die or lose a limb. Jedi were fast, and now there were two of them. James Darkblade walked up to them and bowed. "Greetings, Mr. Grimm and you, Derlin Quell. I am James Darkblade, and this is my niece and former Padawan Della Darkblade. I here to make the two of you an offer in exchange for your services," James said. "And what is that exactly?" Grimm asked. "Come with me," James said, turning around with Della in tow. The four people headed back to the spaceport where James showed them his shuttle. "It is called the Shadow Blade. It has served me in the past well enough. I could use an experienced pilot who could take me where I need to go as well as good gunner." "I am willing to pay 10,000 credits, James said. Both Grimm and Derlin looked at each in shock. While Derlin might be able to hide his facial expression behind his armoured helmet, James could sense his surprise. "I take it we have a deal?" James said with a smirk. Grimm tried not to nod too enthusiastically when he said, "Yes." Neither man much cared where the Jedi were going. That much money would pay for everything they needed. They could practically repair the ship from top to bottom with money still left over. As they headed inside, it was obvious James had made some extensive modifications, cutting down on passenger room, the shuttle now more cargo space as Grimm could see. He gave James a questioning look. "If you wish, you may have the ship when we are finished. She has served me well, as I have said. I believe she could do the same for you and your friend. While I mean no insult to you, unlike your vessel, this one is in good condition," James said. "You seem to know a lot about my ship, Jedi. Other than your first name, there is nothing familiar about you," Grimm said. "Meeting you was no accident, as you have already gathered. Somehow you are vital to our mission. Both of your faces I have seen in my visions concerning it," James said. Derlin had been eyeing the beautiful Della and her traditional Darkblade hairstyle. Two tight braids had been set on either side of her face, hanging down, with the rest drawn up into a ponytail, not unlike James's. James still had the single braid with his own ponytail. It was unusual if one hadn't been to Corellia and seen a Darkblade wear it. James and Della wore theirs in remembrance of their family's original home. Wherever they were, the Darkblades would always remember their strong ties to that distant world. Before coming to Ossus, James had returned the planet, taking in its beauty. Even now he could remember it with great fondness. Ossus, if anything, was an adopted home or a second one. Corellia would always have a special place in his heart. Derlin was deeply attracted to the young woman, while he did not forget the history of war between the Jedi and the Mandalorians. He could not help but see how lovely she was. His people had learned to respect Force users, though he himself believed they were nothing without their famed lightsabers. It was these thoughts that drew James's attention. "Would care to test that theory, young Mandalorian? Perhaps without the lightsaber? Why don't you choose your weapon?" James said, and Derlin noted the last part had not been a question. "Unarmed without direct Force use?" Derlin asked. Part of him was actually eager to test the famed Jedi prowess. He intended to prove once and for all that they were nothing without those precious lightsabers of theirs. "Very well," James said. Derlin removed his helmet, handing it to his friend and squaring off with the Jedi. "I'm going to enjoy this," Derlin said, his roughly handsome face turning into an intimidating snarl, removing his helmet and handing it to Grimm. James looked at him unconcerned. Smiling, James replied, "I doubt it." It was the smile that shook Derlin's concentration. He had never heard of a Jedi smiling before battle. They had always been described to him as hating it. Most were generally reluctant to kill as he understood it. Why did this one smile? He received an answer in short order as a palm heel strike caught him in the nose. The flat of James's palm crushed his nose, bringing tears to Derlin's eyes. He had trouble seeing, leaving him open to 4 more hits that sent him reeling. James was not as strong as him, but his attacks were well aimed. When he finally got his vision back, the larger man tried to close the distance between them unsuccessfully. Each time he tried to corner the quick Jedi Master, he received a few strikes for his trouble. By the time he made a counterattack, James was already free and clear out of his range. Trying again, he tried to make a feint to trick the Jedi, and it seemed to work. Preparing to rush in and deliver the final punch that would end the fight, Derrens was caught by surprise. A spinning back kick caught him in the jaw, snapping his head back and cutting out the lights. He fell to the ground, hard unconscious. Grim winced at the impact. "He's going to have a headache when he wakes up," Grim said, looking down at him. "Did you have to hit him so hard, Uncle?" Della asked. Heading up the ramp into the ship, James said, "Even the finest warrior needs a lesson in humility when his head gets too big. I made sure not to cause any permanent damage." Together, Della and Grim picked up the unconscious man and dragged him inside. Derrens came to as they set him in one of the 2 seats near the cockpit. "Wakey, wakey, old buddy. You nearly got your head taken off, and what is worse, apparently he was holding back," Grim said teasingly. Derrens didn't know which was worse, the splitting headache he had, or the fact that his friend would never let him forget this. "Don't take it personally. My uncle prefers confidence to overconfidence. It is one thing to be sure, and quite another to assume. In the end, you are not the first to fall because of that distinction. The Emperor was defeated thanks to my uncle, and much later a cocky Padawan who needed to be taught her place received a similar lesson. A month before my training was finished, I had the sudden impression that I too could outclass him. I also felt that same boot, though I must admit I would have preferred your hurt. He hit me in the gut and I nearly became sick," Della said before setting a hand on his temple. In the space of a moment, the pain was gone as if it had just simply evaporated. "What did you do?" Derrens asked. Taking her hand away to check her work, Della replied, "I used a Jedi healing technique. It is a part of my training. Family tradition insists on it." Locking eyes with him, Della noticed him staring at her and she blushed, looking away. "It seems you two are full of surprises," Derrens said, smiling warmly. "Just for future reference, you should check your attitude before we continue. The people we are hunting won't be so merciful," Della said. "And who exactly are we hunting?" Grim asked. "A Sith Lord and his apprentice," Della replied, getting up from where she had been kneeling. "Figures," Derrens said with a smile and a shake of his head. "Don't tell me you didn't guess something was up," Grim said, looking at him. Getting up himself, Derrens tested his jaw, moving it around. "Suppose I should have. It also figures you're not scared, flyboy. You always did have little sense," Derrens replied. Patting his friend on the back, Grim said, "Come on, dear old buddy. This is the adventure of a lifetime. Besides, think of the rewards. We'll be set with a new ship and plenty of credits to spare. More than that, Mr. Grim. You'll be coming with us when this all over. Tell me, do you remember a man who looked a little like me?" James said, joining them from the cockpit after jumping them into hyperspace. A chill ran over both men as they remembered the man the Jedi described. "I thought as much. Bellum was much older than I. His son Bell is in fact Della's half-brother. His mother died during the Clone Wars. I suspect Bell brought you here and made you forget where you came from. The dark seed was planted at the moment he heard of his mother's death. Afterwards, the original Nargasadao trapped him inside this alternate dimension. When my son came, he found all of you and created another reality around you four. Bell believes that his master will take him with him," James said. Seeing the confused look cross the 2 men's faces, Della said, "Perhaps I should fill them in on the missing parts." Della told them everything, and after a while the smuggler and his friend began to understand. Soon enough they needed no more explanation. "So these guys know the way out, and you want us to help you so we can go too?" Grim said, puzzling it together. Like Derrens, he was more of a heat-of-the-moment guy. He liked to figure out things on the fly and was having trouble outside of it. "Pretty much," James said. "Suits me just fine. I could do for a little payback right now." "Sounds like we owe those two a couple of licks," Derrens said. "And we get to go home," Grim added. James suddenly found himself on a strange planet facing his son. "Hello, father, long time no see," Malice said behind his black mask. "It seems you have fully assumed your place as Dark Lord. What is it you want from me?" James asked, his face a mask in itself. Malice noticed his father's emotions were even under tight control. "You do not seem pleased to see me," Malice said, a pleased glint in his eyes. Raising an eyebrow, James replied, "Should I be?" Malice smiled, his grin almost chilling. "I offer you a gift, a way out and a chance to recover or kill me and Belle. I will not offer it a second time if you do not come. Come to where it began and we will be waiting," Malice said. As quickly as the shadowy world appeared, it disappeared, leaving him back on the ship. Everyone was staring at him. Without a word, James went to cockpit and added new nav coordinates. "Where are we going?" Grim asked. "Back to where it began," Della answered. She had sensed the communication between Malice and her uncle. After hearing what they had talked about, Derrens said, "Sounds like a trap." James sat down in the co-pilot seat before looking back at him. The Mandalorian was fully dressed in his armor, and despite his calm voice was itching for a fight. James was reminded of the ancient warriors who had borne that name, bringing war and terror to the galaxy more than once. Proud combatants, they believed only the strong should survive. More than once had the Jedi risen to the challenge. It was strange that a Jedi and a Mandalorian would be paired together yet again, given their mixed history. "I would not doubt that, Derrens. Unfortunately, it is our only way out. We have no choice but to take the risk," James said. As they exited hyperspace, they found 3 fighters on their scopes. "It appears we have a welcoming party. Know who they are?" Grim asked James. "Force users, all 3 of them, and they're not alone," James answered. At that moment, a star destroyer jumped into orbit of the planet in front of them. As Grim pulled up so as not to collide with it, turbolasers lit up the space around them. "Well, since everyone is here, let's have a little fun," Grim said, flashing a smile. Looking at the star destroyer over his shoulder, Della said, "What do mean a little fun?" Making sure to buckle up while he watched the targeting screen, Derrens said, "You might want to take a seat. Like I said before, Grim's a little crazy. The only good news is that he usually can pull off what he is trying to do. Well, more than half the time." Della gave her uncle a dirty look as they buckled up. James shrugged, saying, "Like the man said, he's good." Grim strafed the star destroyer, dodging laser bolts easily. Turning the ship at what seemed like the last second, he stayed so close that the turbo lasers couldn't get a fix on him. The 3 fighters, among the many more TIE fighters, launching from the capital ship, were content to wait until they made a break for it. When Grim finally did make a stab for the planet, the 3 fighters were in hot pursuit, while the rest hung in orbit. "Why aren't the rest following us?" Grim asked. "Not that I don't have my hands full." He added the last part, as shot came way too close, bouncing off the shields and shaking the ship. Derrens had moved to the stern gun, managing only to slow their pursuers down with a near-constant barrage of laser fire, but they refused to give up. "Do you recognize any of these guys, Master Jedi?" Derrens called out. "No," James called back, finding something odd about them. He looked at Della, communicating with her through telepathy to see if she noticed it. He received a mental acknowledgement that confirmed his findings. The 3 Dark Jedi seemed to share the same mind. Malice's touch lay on them, leaving an imprint for James to pick up on. "You're not going to be able to outrun them. Their job is to drive us directly to the temple. Once we reach there, they will break off," James said. "Roger," Grim said with a nod. Heading low over the trees, he landed smoothly in front of the temple. The 3 fighters came down for a landing on the far side. Unbuckling himself, Grim looked back at James in the passenger seat and the look on his face. "What now?" Grim said, not liking the look. "We have plenty of company out there," Della answered. Sure enough, stormtroopers came into view as they began to surround the ship. Coming up to the front, Derrens said, "Not good." "What do we do now?" Grim asked. "Fight our way out, I suppose," James said. "You can't be serious," Grim shouted, pointing outside. "There must be 100 of them out there." Now it was Derrens' turn to smile cockily. "What's the matter, buddy? A few minutes ago you were in your element. I think we've done pretty well so far. Personally, I like our odds," Derrens said, readying his blaster rifle. Donning his scout armor from among his gear, Grim was now well protected. Through the visor he could enhance his vision and even see in the dark. It had cost him a bundle, but as blaster burns on his suit showed, it had seen some use. "Still, it's 4 against 100 or more," Grim said, trying to calm his nerves. He checked his own blaster rifle to make sure it was full and ready. "We got good armor and our own real-live Jedi hero at our side." The girl wasn't kidding about her uncle. "I recognize him from his description. Anyone that can take on squads of clone troops, and the Emperor himself tips the odds in our favor. Plus, look at this nice armor we have along with your thermal detonators," Derrens said cheerfully. Hoisting up an entire sack full of them, Grim said, "Well, when you put it that way." The ramp lowered, and a single orb was tossed expertly among a number of the stormtroopers. All of them looked to see what it was, and those who did tried to run all too late. An explosion sent men and weapons flying, causing panic among them as Grim and the rest of the party appeared more and more were tossed. Imperials who had thought this to be an easy capture began to run for cover, as Jedi, explosions, and blaster bolts cut many of them down. Using the opening, the small group rushed into the temple before the Imperials could regroup. Glancing back at the entrance after they rounded a corner inside, Grim said, "That should give them something to think about." Derrens checked to see how many shots he had left before saying, "Yeah, but eventually they'll come in after us. This place is virtually a maze of passageways. You Jedi should go on ahead. Grim and I will keep them busy for as long as we can." "Think you can set up some traps, buddy?" Derrens said. "I figure I can work something out," Grim said. Grim is a bit of an explosive expert. It comes in handy from time to time. Part of the reason why the Hutt who was after us hated us so much. James here managed to take out his second-in-command, an annoying Twi'lek along with some his bodyguards when the Hutt tried to grab us. We have been on his hit list ever since," Derrens said, explaining it to them. "Keeps life interesting," Grim said as he rigged up a homemade bomb. "Seems you two have everything well in hand. Meet up with us as soon as you can. Don't take any unnecessary risks," James said. "Hey, it's me," Grim replied. "I think that's the point, buddy. Personally, I would rather live through this. There are not a lot of us Mandalorians left," Derrens said. "Good hunting, gentlemen," Della said, following her uncle as they headed off. James and Della entered the all-too-familiar chamber that had held that holocron, that which brought them to this reality. Standing there before them were 4 dark Jedi, not counting Malice sitting on a stone throne. Bell stood on the left while 3 brothers stood on the right. They were identical triplets who even smiled erringly at the same time. Their minds were still shared even now. Their species James recognized right away. They were Sith. Somehow Malice had been able to create the species in which a Dark Jedi had conquered to become the first Dark Lord of the Sith. A species where the name originally derived from. Behind them and in front of Malice's throne stood a red holocron on a metallic stand. It glowed with an evil red light, menacing and cold. "Welcome. We have been expecting you. I trust you didn't have too much trouble," Malice said. The dark side emanated from Darth Malice as he sat there studying them. The Dark Jedi turned to their master cold but worshipful. James did not detect the aura of the Sith from any of them. The reason for this soon became apparent. "Now you must prove your ability and your loyalty. Kill them," Malice said to his apprentices. The 3 brothers who James saw approaching him eyed him like predators eyeing their prey. Bell approached Della in a similar manner. Even now James could feel their arrogance and hatred. He and Della was all that stood between them and their ambitions. James knew that he could not make it to Della without first dealing with his own attackers. Igniting his lightsaber, he watched them do the same. Picking the closest one, James attacked before they could fully surround him. They were fast-moving as one perfectly, but James was faster. When the Dark Jedi he attacked slashed for him, James flipped over him. The Dark Jedi sliced through thin air where he expected his quarry to be. James stabbed backwards, killing him. As the dying Dark Jedi fell, James felt the others weaken, as if their strength in the Force had been collected. The other two attacked, but this time much slower. James held them off, blocking each blade, even as they tried to flank him. With a single Force push, he sent one flying, leaving only one to deal with. The last of the brothers, still standing, tried to stabbing him, thinking he was distracted. James anticipated the move and grabbed his arm. Off balance, the Dark Jedi came forward under momentum, only to have James' lightsaber slash into him. With two down, James turned to the third to find Della finishing off Belle. He had not been able to see any of her fight with her half-brother until now. Her brother died surprised after first losing his hand, then his head in two quick motions of her saber. The last remaining Dark Jedi was now 1 against 2. In a fury, he fired bolts of lightning from his fingers. James caught them with an outstretched hand, forcing it back at him. The lightning, fueled by the dark side, arched and reflected in its full fury, struck him, searing his body. The Dark Jedi died by his own attack, slammed off his feet. "Your apprentices leave much to be desired," James said. "They served their purpose," Malice said, rising. Calling his lightsaber to his hand, Malice said, "Let us end this old man." Malice attacked, his movements precise, holding both off Jedi. A backhand blow sent Della sprawling, and James landed a kick to Malice's midsection with a spinning back kick. Malice took the blow, well hardening his abdomen at the last second by exhaling, and was only sent back a step or two. "You'll have to do better than that, old man," Malice said tauntingly. "All right then, let us not hold back. It's obvious you refuse to change. For that I'm sorry, son," James said sadly. Twirling his lightsaber in his hand, Malice said, "Save your pitiful regret. I want none of it. If you will not join me by now, you never will. A pity we could have done much, you and I. All others would have fallen before us. Now both you and your would-be daughter will die. Others stronger than her will join me in search of true power. I merely sought this last chance to help you. It is not too late to change," James said, offering his son every compassion he could. "That is the problem, Father. I never wanted to change. You taught me the meaning of power, and now I want nothing else. This galaxy will one day kneel before me, and I will create a great shadow empire that will rule all behind the scenes. I will raise and topple worlds, and none will ever know for sure I had a hand in it, but there shall be whispers. That is power and my true ambition. None will be able to strike me down because they shall never find me. I will be a ghost causing fear and panic. The leaders of each world will be my puppets, and those who try to stand against me I will pervert or destroy. My empire will outlast all. I will be decisive and strong as you taught me to be. In the end, I will be what you should have been before you joined your weak Jedi. They will be no different from the rest. I will enjoy turning many of them, offering the power you would deny them. If Della would but join me, she could have a part in that future, but she will not. She is too much like you. Now it is time for you to die to pave the way to that glorious future," Malice said. Nodding sadly, James said, "Then I am truly sorry, my son, for what I must do." Deactivating his lightsaber, James hooked to his belt. Malice snorted in disgust at what he considered an act of cowardice. "You mistake my intentions, son. Today you will receive your final lesson," James said. "And I will pass it like all the others," Malice said with a cocky smile, readying himself. He seemed to have no doubt that he would pass this challenge. "We shall see," James said. Charging forward at the challenge, Malice made a leaping stab for his father. Neatly sidestepping, James gave him a slap to the back of the head through the Force. Caught off balance, Malice was sent flying forward. Immediately getting to his feet, Malice growled, asking, "How did you do that? I didn't even predict that movement." Thinking about it, Malice said, "As a matter of fact, you were a blank to me." A gust of wind appeared from nowhere, putting out each torch around the room. Standing in the darkness, Malice heard and saw nothing. Looking this way and that, he found no sign of James. Even as he stretched his senses to their limits, he never saw the strike that got him. By the time he felt it, his approach, it was too late. A jolt shot through his body like a blaster on stun setting, but there was no blaster being fired. His muscles failed and he fell to the floor, only managing to stay conscious, using the Force to barely accomplish that. Ah! Malice groaned, his lightsaber slipping from his fingers. He was too weak to fight back when James drew the Force from him, gritting his teeth in pain. Malice's power was great and the dark side was strong in him, but something felt odd. A flare of power caused both James and Malice's faces to contort in a horrible feeling of pain. Both men would have screamed if they could have drawn breath. When at last the job was done, James removed his hand, sinking to the floor after a few unsteady steps. Agony gripped James' body and his breaths were shallow. Every nerve cell seemed to be burning and exposed, except he felt no wounds. Muscles contorted and contracted till he felt like he had been ripped apart. So that was your plan. Deny me the use of the Force so I might live. Well done, my old master, Malice said. The original Malice is on the other side already, isn't he? But you are a part of him, I sense that. James replied, looking at Malice, who chuckled. Only you could have figured that out. I'm impressed, Malice said, rising to a sitting position with great effort. The answer to both is yes. We share a consciousness. I am a part of him. You could say an extension. I know all he knows and vice versa. We are one. In time I would have equaled him in power, but then we both were sure that somehow you would turn the tide. It was why I provided you everything you needed to leave. The Emperor, for all his power, would have lost to you if I had not killed him. He was unworthy of you. I had hoped to kill your companions and turn you, but there will be other times, I assure you. For now, I refuse to live the rest of my existence powerless and weak. The holocron on the stand near the throne lit up, illuminating the room with a blood-red light. My final gift. Take it, and the darkness that is now in you will open the doorway to take you home. Never again will you be able to walk completely in the light. The line in between will be your world, until we meet again, Faither. Malice said, picking up the lightsaber and stabbing into himself. Dying, he fell face first to the floor. James grimaced, sadness filling him. He had not wanted it to come to this. James had hoped somehow to save him. Rising with Della's help, he called Malice's lightsaber to him. Catching it, he stuck it to his belt. Grim and Derrens appeared, closing and bracing the door behind with a metal pedestal through the handholds. Hey, who turned out the lights? Grim asked. Just in time, we were getting ready to leave. Join us if you would, James said. The doors behind them suddenly jarring violently was all the encouragement that the two men needed. Rushing over to Della and James, they made it there before blaster's bolts burst the door open. Closing his eyes for a moment, James drew up the power inside the holocron. In a flash of light, they stood in the same temple back in their own galaxy. Looking around the well-lit room, Grim said, "That's much better. Wish we still had the ship, though." Shrugging, James said, "If you want, you can have the one I came here in. It also is a Lambda class." Removing his helmet, James Grim had a smile from ear to ear. "That works," Grim said as they headed out of the room towards the shuttle. Epilogue. James joined Luke Skywalker in Skywalker's effort to rebuild the Jedi Order. Using his past experiences, he brought tradition and invaluable knowledge to the growing number of Jedi. Della rose to the rank of Jedi Master and aided in training the new students. James Grim and Derrens Qual picked up where they left off, getting into trouble with a number of crime bosses. On the plus side, they now were able to stay one step ahead of them. As the Jedi Order finally gained enough members to fully aid the New Republic, Luke asked both Darkblades to sit on the new Jedi Council as 2 out of the 3 few actual Masters. James, in a surprise move, declined, mysteriously disappearing beyond the Outer Rim. What would happen next is another story.